Night settled over the kingdom of Blackwood like a shroud, the darkness deeper than memory. From the highest tower of his fortress, King Magnus Blackthorn stood motionless, his weathered hands gripping the cold stone of the parapet. Below him stretched his realm, once vibrant and prosperous, now a wasteland of withered fields and silent villages. The dying light caught the silver in his once raven hair, a testament to the 30 years of his reign and the 20 years of his curse. Magnus inhaled deeply, tasting the familiar bitterness in the air. At 58, his broad shoulders still carried the bearing of the legendary warrior he had been, but his amber eyes reflected a soul worn thin by decades of struggle against an enemy he could not defeat with sword or strategy. The wind whispered through the ancient stones, carrying memories of laughter and prosperity that had long since abandoned these halls. 20 years ago, these windows had framed a different view. Golden fields stretching to the horizon, forests teeming with life, villages bustling with commerce and celebration. 20 years since his fateful confrontation with the witch Morwen, whose dying curse had become his living nightmare. "Your Majesty." The voice behind him belonged to Alaric, his beta and oldest friend. At 65, Alaric had been beside him through glory and despair, the lines on his face etched by the same battles and the same sorrow. "The council awaits," Alaric continued, his deep voice resonating in the chamber. "The elders have gathered." Magnus did not turn immediately. His gaze remained fixed on the distant horizon, where the border of his kingdom met the territory of Lord Gerard, the only region still untouched by the spreading blight. The irony did not escape him. The most ambitious and ruthless of his vassals ruled over the last fertile corner of Blackwood. "Tell me, old friend," Magnus finally spoke, his voice a low rumble like distant thunder. "What is left for us to discuss? What strategies remain unexamined? What remedies untried?" Alaric moved to stand beside his king. Together, they had fought wars, built a kingdom, and watched it slowly die. The bond between them transcended words, forged in blood and honor through decades of shared purpose. "There is always hope, Magnus," Alaric replied, though the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. "As long as you draw breath, there is hope for Blackwood." Magnus turned then, his movement deliberate and controlled, a king even in his despair. The firelight from the chamber's hearth illuminated the network of scars that crossed his face and disappeared beneath his collar, badges of honor from countless battles, all easier than the one he now fought daily. "Hope," he repeated, the word falling from his lips like a stone. "I wonder if hope itself has been poisoned by this curse." The great hall awaited them, its vaulted ceiling lost in shadow despite the dozens of torches lining the walls. 5 decades ago, Magnus's father had commissioned the massive oak table at its center, carved from a single ancient tree. Now the wood was gray and lifeless, mirroring the kingdom it served. Around the table sat the council of elders, men and women who had guided Blackwood's prosperity and now managed its decline. Their faces were grave as Magnus entered, each bearing the weight of responsibility for a dying land. "Your Majesty," they intoned, rising as one. Magnus took his place at the head of the table, the massive throne-like chair, a reminder of better days. "Be seated," he commanded, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "Let us not waste time on ceremony when our kingdom withers a little more with each passing day." The eldest council member, Lord Tiberius, cleared his throat. At 83, he had served 3 generations of Blackthorn rulers. "Sire, the reports from the eastern provinces grow more dire. The blight has reached the river Aeson. The villages there report crop failure and illness among the livestock." "The treasury cannot sustain further grain imports," added Lady Selene, her silver hair gleaming in the torchlight. "The neighboring kingdoms increase their prices, knowing our desperation." One by one, the council members delivered their reports, each worse than the last. As they spoke, Magnus felt the familiar burning sensation begin in his chest, the physical manifestation of Morwen's curse. The blight that consumed his land was merely an extension of the darkness that had taken root within him that fateful day. The memory emerged unbidden, vivid and cruel in its clarity. The witch Morwen, her eyes blazing with power and hatred as she lay dying by his blade. Her final words, spoken not in anger but with terrible certainty. "The darkness you bring to me, I return to you 1,000-fold. Your joy will turn to ash in your mouth. Your strength will become your prison. Your land will reflect the blight in your soul until you find what you have never sought." 20 years of searching for a cure. 20 years of watching his kingdom die by increments, mirroring the corruption that spread through his own body, aging him before his time, turning his victories hollow. "Your Majesty," Lord Tiberius's voice cut through his thoughts, "what would you have us do?" Magnus found every eye upon him, looking for leadership, for hope, for the king who had once seemed invincible. He straightened in his chair, summoning the strength that had never failed him in battle. "Continue the rationing program in the affected areas. Double the hunting parties in the northern forest. The game there may yet be untainted." His commands came automatically, born of years of crisis management. "And what of Lord Gerard's proposal?" asked Lady Selene, her tone carefully neutral. The hall grew silent. Gerard's proposal was well known among the council, that Magnus abdicate in his favor, allowing fresh blood to rule what remained of Blackwood. The unspoken suggestion was that perhaps the curse was bound to Magnus alone, that with him gone, the land might heal. "Lord Gerard forgets himself," Alaric growled before Magnus could respond. "The crown is not a bauble to be passed around when challenges arise." Magnus raised a hand, silencing his friend. "Gerard's ambition has always outweighed his wisdom," he stated flatly. "But his territory remains fertile while all else withers. That gives him power, whether we acknowledge it or not." The burning in his chest intensified, a sharp reminder of his failing. Every decision he made, every action he took, all seemed to feed the curse rather than fight it. The witch's magic had been cunning indeed, turning his greatest strength, his unwavering determination, into the very thing that deepened the curse's hold. "Perhaps," a new voice spoke, hesitant and aged. All eyes turned to the end of the table where Elias the healer sat. At 80, he was the oldest among them, his body frail, but his mind still keen. Rarely did he speak at council meetings, preferring to listen and advise privately. "Speak, Elias," Magnus encouraged, curious despite himself. The old man's hands trembled as he unrolled a scroll of yellowed parchment. "I have been searching the ancient texts, Your Majesty. The royal library contains manuscripts predating the founding of Blackwood itself." The council members exchanged glances. Elias's obsession with ancient lore was well known and mostly tolerated as the harmless hobby of an old man. "In the oldest records, I found a prophecy, or perhaps a riddle, that speaks of a curse similar to ours." His finger traced the faded script. "It speaks of a king whose land withered with his soul, and how salvation came not from strength, but from its opposite." "Speak plainly, Elias," Magnus commanded, though something in the old man's tone had kindled an unfamiliar sensation in his chest, not hope precisely, but a momentary abatement of hopelessness. Elias looked up, his rheumy eyes suddenly sharp with purpose. "Only an Omega with the gift of healing can drive out the darkness from an Alpha's heart. This is what the text says, Your Majesty." The silence that followed was profound. "An Omega healer?" Lord Tiberius scoffed finally. "Such talents are rare even in prosperous times. In our current state, with Omegas fleeing to more fertile lands—" "Superstition," declared another counselor dismissively. But Magnus leaned forward, his amber eyes fixed on Elias. "Continue." Encouraged, the old healer read directly from the scroll. "When the land mirrors the soul's blight, seek the one whose touch brings life from death. In the joining of shadow and light lies redemption for both." "Cryptic nonsense," muttered someone. "Perhaps," Magnus agreed, settling back in his chair. "But we have tried conventional wisdom for 2 decades without success. I would hear more of this prophecy, Elias." Before the healer could respond, the great doors of the hall swung open. A guard entered, his expression urgent. "Your Majesty, Lord Gerard has arrived at the gates. He requests an immediate audience." The timing was too perfect to be coincidence. Magnus exchanged a glance with Alaric, whose hand had already moved to the hilt of his sword. "Interesting," Magnus said softly. "It seems our ambitious lord has developed a sense for opportune moments. Admit him." As the guard departed, Magnus turned back to the council. "We will revisit Elias's discovery. For now, let us hear what Gerard brings besides his customary ambition." The doors opened again, admitting Lord Gerard, a man whose physical beauty masked a calculating mind. At 45, he was in his prime, his dark hair untouched by gray, his green eyes sharp with intelligence and hunger. He moved with the confident grace of an alpha who had never known defeat, his fine clothing and jeweled sword hilt testifying to the prosperity of his lands. "Your Majesty," Gerard bowed with perfect courtesy, though the gesture lacked genuine respect. "I come bearing both grave news and perhaps an opportunity." "Speak then," Magnus commanded, noting how Gerard's gaze swept the council table, assessing each member's disposition. "Raiders from beyond the mountains have struck 3 villages in my territory," Gerard reported. "While my forces drove them back, the attacks were more organized than previous incursions. I believe they sense weakness in Blackwood." "Your territory remains the richest prize," Magnus noted dryly. "It is hardly surprising they focus their attention there." Gerard inclined his head in acknowledgement. "Indeed. However, I did not come merely to report this threat." His voice shifted, becoming smoother, almost ingratiating. "I have brought someone, who might be of particular interest to your Majesty." Magnus's eyes narrowed. "Explain." "During my tour of the border villages, I encountered a most unusual Omega." Gerard's smile did not reach his eyes. "A healer of remarkable skill. The villagers speak of her almost as a miracle worker." The council chamber grew utterly still. Magnus felt Elias straighten beside him, the old man's breath catching. "A coincidence, surely," Magnus said, his voice betraying nothing of the sudden tension he felt. "Perhaps," Gerard replied. "Or perhaps fate has a sense of irony. This Omega lives in the most distant village in my territory, practicing her craft among peasants when she might serve greater purposes. And you thought to bring her to court out of the goodness of your heart?" Alaric's skepticism was palpable. Gerard's smile widened. "I thought to bring her as a gift to my king, a token of my continued loyalty in these difficult times." The calculated insult was clear to everyone present. A gift implied superiority of position, the strong providing for the weak. "How thoughtful," Magnus replied, his voice dangerously soft. "And where is this miraculous healer now?" "Waiting outside, Your Majesty, along with her daughter." Gerard's tone suggested this detail was an afterthought, though Magnus sensed it was anything but. "Bring them in," Magnus ordered, ignoring the burning sensation that had intensified in his chest. Whether from the curse or from anger at Gerard's transparent machinations, he could not tell. The doors opened once more. 2 figures entered, their simple clothing stark against the grandeur of the great hall. The woman walked with quiet dignity despite her obvious nervousness. In her late 30s, she possessed a serene beauty that required no enhancement. Clear gray eyes set in a face that had known both joy and sorrow, honey-brown hair pulled back in a simple braid. Beside her walked a girl of perhaps 12, her mother's features reflected in miniature, though her eyes held a wariness beyond her years. "Your Majesty," Gerard announced with theatrical flourish, "may I present Elara of Willowbrook and her daughter Diana." The Omega met Magnus's gaze without flinching, a rare quality in his presence even before the curse. As their eyes locked, something unexpected flashed between them, not recognition precisely, but an awareness, profound and instantaneous. "Approach," Magnus commanded, his voice softer than he had intended. Elara moved forward, her daughter keeping pace beside her. She stopped at a respectful distance from the great table and offered a graceful curtsy. "Your Majesty," she spoke, her voice clear and melodious despite the tension evident in her bearing. "Lord Gerard has brought us to your court without explanation. I know not what service I am expected to provide." Her directness was refreshing amid the court's careful politics. Magnus studied her, noting the quiet strength in her posture, the protective way she kept her daughter close. "I am told you are a healer of some renown," he said. "I have some skill with herbs and traditional remedies," she acknowledged modestly. "The people of Willowbrook have been kind enough to seek my help when illness strikes." "She is being modest, Your Majesty," Gerard interjected smoothly. "The villagers speak of miraculous recoveries, animals at death's door, restored to health, crops flourishing under her care when all around them fail." Magnus noted the flash of unease in Alara's eyes. Such tales could easily transition from marvel to accusation of witchcraft. She was right to be cautious. "Is this true?" he asked her directly. Alara hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "I was blessed with a gift for nurturing life, Your Majesty. Plants respond well to my care, and I have had success treating various ailments. But miracles?" She shook her head. "I am merely persistent in my efforts." Magnus sensed the partial truth in her words. She was hiding something, not out of malice, but from well-honed caution. A woman with unusual gifts would have learned early to downplay her abilities. "And what would you have me do with this gift from your lands, Lord Gerard?" Magnus asked, returning his attention to the younger Alpha. Gerard spread his hands in a gesture of false generosity. "I thought perhaps she might attend to Your Majesty personally. The burdens of rule are great, and a skilled healer might ease them somewhat." The insult was thinly veiled, a reference to Magnus's premature aging, to the visible toll of the curse that no courtier dared mention directly. Before Magnus could respond, the young girl, Diana, suddenly spoke. "My mother helps people who truly need help," she said, her clear voice ringing in the hall. "Not those who seek to use her for their own gain." A collective gasp rose from the council. Such boldness from a child, and to an Alpha Lord, was unheard of. Gerard's pleasant mask slipped for an instant, revealing the cold calculation beneath. "Children should be seen and not heard," he said silkily, "especially in the presence of their betters." Alara moved subtly, placing herself between her daughter and Gerard. "Forgive her, Your Majesty," she said, though her eyes held no apology. "Diana speaks from the heart, without the benefit of courtly training." To everyone's surprise, Magnus laughed, a short, rusty sound as if long unused. "The heart often speaks truths the courtly tongue dares not utter," he said. "Your daughter has courage, Lady Alara, a valuable trait." He rose from his chair, the movement drawing all eyes. At his full height, Magnus Blackthorne remained an imposing figure, his broad-shouldered frame and regal bearing untouched by the curse that had stolen his youth. "Lord Gerard brings an interesting proposition," he announced, addressing the council while his eyes remained on Alara. "A healer at court when our land sickens. The timing is convenient." Alara met his gaze steadily. "I make no claims beyond my abilities, Your Majesty. I am a simple healer from a border village, not a miracle worker." "Perhaps," Magnus agreed, "or perhaps you are exactly what Blackwood needs in this dark hour." The burning in his chest intensified, but for once Magnus welcomed it. For 20 years, the curse had been his constant companion, a darkness within that mirrored the blight spreading across his realm. Now, facing this quiet woman with her direct gaze and healing hands, he felt something he had almost forgotten: curiosity, and beneath it, the faintest stirring of possibility. "There is a test I would set you," he declared, the words forming even as he spoke them. "Not of your loyalty, which I have no cause to question, but of your gift." Alara inclined her head. "If it is within my power, Your Majesty." Magnus gestured toward the eastern window of the hall. "In the glass garden stands the royal tree, the heart of Blackwood since its founding. For centuries, it has reflected the kingdom's prosperity. Now it withers, as does all else under my rule." He stepped down from the dais, approaching Alara with measured steps. Up close, he towered over her, yet she did not shrink back. "If your gift is as remarkable as Lord Gerard claims, restore life to the royal tree by the next full moon." Succeed, and you will have earned not only my gratitude, but a place of honor at court. Fail." He paused, his amber eyes holding hers. "And you return to your village with my thanks for the attempt." And the terms were generous by any measure. Success would bring reward, failure no punishment. Yet the undercurrents in the hall suggested everyone present understood the true stakes. "And my daughter?" Elara asked, revealing her primary concern. "Will be treated as an honored guest, regardless of the outcome," Magnus promised. He could see her weighing his words, assessing not just the task, but the complex political currents swirling around her. She was no naive village healer. There was wisdom in those gray eyes, hard-won through experience. "I accept your challenge, Your Majesty," she said finally, "though I must set one condition of my own." Alaric stiffened at the boldness, but Magnus raised a hand, intrigued. "Speak it." "During the time of this test, neither I nor my daughter will be harmed or interfered with in any way." Her voice was calm but firm. "By anyone at court." Her gaze flickered briefly toward Gerard before returning to Magnus. The implication was clear. She understood exactly why she had been brought here and by whom. "Agreed," Magnus replied without hesitation. "You have my royal oath." He turned to Gerard, whose carefully composed expression could not entirely hide his displeasure at this unexpected development. "You have brought a valuable gift indeed, Lord Gerard. Blackwood thanks you for your loyalty." Gerard bowed, the picture of courtly grace despite the subtle rebuke. "I live to serve the kingdom, Your Majesty, always." "We shall see," Magnus replied softly. Then, louder to the council, "The matter is decided. Lady Elara will attempt to heal the royal tree. Until the full moon, she and her daughter are under my personal protection." As the council session concluded and the members filed out, Magnus noticed Elias's thoughtful gaze following Elara. The old healer's discovery and Gerard's gift, coming on the same day, strained coincidence to the breaking point. Something larger was unfolding, something tied to the curse that had defined his existence for 2 long decades. Later, alone in his chambers, Magnus stood before the ancient mirror, studying the reflection he usually avoided. The face that looked back at him was that of a man in his 70s, not his true 58 years. Deep lines marked his forehead and the corners of his eyes, his once black hair now more silver than not. Only his eyes remained unchanged, amber and intense, a king's eyes. "If your gift is real," he whispered to the absent healer, "if you can bring life back to the tree, could you also bring it back to me, to my kingdom?" The answer came not in words, but in a searing pain that lanced through his chest, dropping him to one knee. The curse, responding to the first genuine hope he had felt in years. Magnus straightened slowly, his breathing ragged. "So," he murmured to the darkness within him, "you fear her." And in that realization lay a dangerous, precious possibility that perhaps, after 20 years of searching, the key to his redemption had finally arrived at his court. In the eastern tower, Elara stood at the window of the chamber assigned to her, gazing out at the blighted lands of Blackwood. Beside her, Diana leaned against her side, seeking the comfort of contact in this strange and potentially dangerous place. "Can you really heal their tree, Mother?" the girl asked softly. Elara's hand absently stroked her daughter's hair. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I know we had no choice but to try." Her thoughts turned to the king, not the fearsome figure of legend, but the man she had seen today. Behind the commanding presence and the weight of his crown, she had glimpsed something unexpected, a soul in pain, fighting a battle he could not win alone. "There is more happening here than Lord Gerard's ambition," she murmured. "The king's suffering. It's connected to the land's blight somehow." Diana looked up at her mother with eyes too wise for her years. "Like the stories grandmother used to tell, about the bond between the true kings and their realm?" Elara nodded slowly. "Perhaps. Old tales often contain forgotten truths." She thought again of Magnus Blackthorn's amber eyes, the moment when their gazes had met and something had passed between them. recognition of a kind, though they had never met before. In that instant, she had sensed the darkness within him, not evil, but something broken and corrupted, a wound festering for too long. "We will try to heal the tree," she told her daughter, her resolve strengthening. "And perhaps, in doing so, we might heal something more." Beyond the window, the moon rose over Blackwood, a waning crescent, counting down the days until its fullness would test her gift against a curse 20 years in the making. Dawn crept reluctantly over the eastern mountains, casting weak light across the glass garden where Alara stood motionless before the royal tree. The massive oak dominated the center of the enclosed space, its trunk wider than 3 men standing shoulder to shoulder, its branches once reaching proudly toward the sky. Now those same branches curved downward, nearly bare despite the season, the few remaining leaves curled and blackened at the edges. The sight stirred something profound in her chest, not just pity for the dying giant, but recognition of the deep magic that connected it to the land. The glass garden had clearly once been magnificent, its dome of interlocking crystal panels designed to capture and enhance the sunlight. Now many panels were cracked or missing entirely, allowing the bitter wind to sweep through unimpeded. The beds that had once housed rare plants from across the realm lay empty or choked with withered remnants. Alara approached the tree slowly, her steps deliberate. She had risen before dawn, leaving Diana sleeping in their chamber, to examine her patient in solitude. As a healer, she had learned that the first assessment was crucial, observing without interference, sensing the true nature of the ailment. "You have seen better days," she murmured, reaching out to touch the rough bark. The moment her fingers made contact, she gasped. A wave of darkness surged through her, so potent she nearly pulled away. But years of healing had taught her to endure initial discomfort, to push through to understanding. She steadied herself and pressed her palm fully against the trunk, closing her eyes to better perceive what her touch revealed. Beneath the surface, decay flowed currents of ancient power, the lifeblood of Blackwood itself. But twined with this vital force was something alien and malevolent. Not natural decay, but a corruption spreading outward from the core, feeding on the tree's essence. The pattern matched the blight affecting the kingdom, but here, at the source, she could feel its true nature more clearly. "A curse indeed," she whispered, opening her eyes, "and a powerful one." What troubled her most was how the darkness within the tree resonated with what she had sensed in King Magnus. The brief moment when their eyes had met had revealed more than words could have conveyed. The same corruption flowed through both monarch and tree, bound by magic she only partially understood. "Can you heal it?" The voice startled her. Alara turned to find Elias, the elderly healer from the council meeting, standing a few paces away. In the pale morning light, he seemed frailer than before, leaning heavily on a gnarled walking stick. "You move quietly for a man of your years," she observed, neither confirming nor denying his question. A smile crinkled the corners of his eyes. "When you've served in the royal household as long as I have, you learn when to be heard and when to pass unnoticed." He shuffled closer, studying her with keen interest. "You sense it, don't you? The connection between the tree and our king." Alara hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. Court politics were dangerous waters, and she had Diana to protect. "The tree is ill," she said carefully, "as is much of the kingdom." Elias nodded, apparently satisfied with her cautious response. "I've been royal physician for 3 generations of Blackthorns, watched Magnus grow from a headstrong boy into a worthy king." His rheumy eyes grew distant with memory. Then came the witch Morwen and her curse. "What do you know of this curse?" Alara asked, her professional curiosity overcoming her caution. "Less than I would like," he admitted, frustration evident in his tone. 20 years ago, Magnus led a campaign against mountain raiders who had been terrorizing our northern villages. During the final battle, they discovered the true power behind the raids was a witch named Morwen, using the bandits to collect blood sacrifices for dark rituals. Alara shivered despite herself. Blood magic was the darkest form of sorcery, drawing power from pain and death rather than the natural forces most practitioners worked with. Magnus confronted her directly, Elias continued. Accounts vary on what exactly happened, but the outcome is clear. Morwen was defeated, but with her dying breath, she laid a curse upon our king. The darkness you bring to me, I return to you 1,000-fold, she said. Your joy will turn to ash in your mouth. Your strength will become your prison. Your land will reflect the blight in your soul until you find what you have never sought. What you have never sought, Elara repeated softly, the words resonating with something deep within her. Elias nodded gravely. From that day forward, a shadow seemed to grow within Magnus, not all at once, but gradually, inexorably. As the darkness claimed him, the land began to reflect his condition. Crops failed, animals sickened, children were born weak or stillborn. The blight spread outward from the capital, a mirror of the curse consuming our king. Elara turned back to the royal tree, understanding blooming. And this tree is the physical embodiment of that connection, the conduit between monarch and realm. Just so, Elias agreed, impressed by her perception. In the oldest texts, it is called the Heart of Blackwood. It was planted by the first king from a seedling blessed by the forest spirits. For centuries, it has reflected the health and prosperity of our kingdom. Elara circled the massive trunk, her mind racing with implications. And now it serves as a conduit for the curse as well, spreading the corruption throughout the land. You understand quickly, Elias observed, watching her closely. Perhaps Lord Gerard was right about one thing. Your gift is remarkable. Lord Gerard knows nothing of my true gifts, she replied sharply, then moderated her tone. He saw an opportunity to curry favor with the king or embarrass him if I failed. My abilities or well-being never factored into his calculations. The old healer's expression softened with sympathy. You judge him correctly. Gerard's ambition has only grown as the kingdom has weakened. With his territory largely unaffected by the blight, he believes himself chosen to rule. That Magnus's curse proves his unworthiness. Elara snorted softly. A convenient belief when one covets another's throne. Indeed. Elias hesitated, then added in a lower voice, but there are other forces at work here. The scroll I found in the archives speaks of salvation coming from an unexpected source, an Omega with healing hands. I make no claims to prophecy, Elara said firmly. I am a healer who uses knowledge passed down through generations, combined with gifts I was born with. Nothing more. And yet, Elias persisted gently, here you are, at precisely the moment when hope seemed lost. Brought by Gerard's machinations, yes, but the forces of destiny often work through the schemes of men. Before Elara could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps drew their attention. A royal guard appeared at the garden entrance, bowing formally. The king requests your presence, Lady Elara, in the East Tower study. Now? She asked, glancing at the early hour. His Majesty rises with the dawn, the guard replied, his tone neutral, but his expression suggesting this was unusual. He specified that the meeting was regarding your task with the royal tree. Elara nodded, brushing soil from her simple dress. Please lead the way. As she followed this guard through the labyrinthine corridors of the palace, Elara found herself studying the very architecture of the place. Where paintings hung, they were faded. Where tapestries adorned the walls, they seemed dull and lifeless. Even the stone itself appeared to have lost its luster, as if the castle were aging prematurely alongside its master. The East Tower study proved surprisingly modest compared to the grandeur of the Great Hall. Bookcases lined the circular walls, filled with leather-bound volumes and ancient scrolls. A massive desk occupied the center of the room, covered with maps and documents. Near the window stood Magnus Blackthorne, his tall frame silhouetted against the morning light. "Leave us," he commanded the guard without turning. When the door closed, Magnus finally faced her. In the clear morning light, the effects of the curse were even more evident than they had been in the torch-lit hall. Deep lines marked his face, and his silver hair caught the sunlight. Yet his posture remained unbowed, his amber eyes sharp with intelligence and power. "You visited the tree at first light," he stated. Not a question. "A healer assesses her patient at different times of day," Alara replied. "Morning often reveals what evening conceals." "And what did the morning reveal to you about the heart of Blackwood?" His tone was carefully neutral, but she sensed the tension beneath. "That its ailment runs deep," she answered honestly. "The corruption flows from within, not from any external cause." Magnus nodded slightly, unsurprised. "Just as it does with me." The admission hung in the air between them, more revealing than he perhaps intended. For a king to acknowledge weakness to a stranger, an omega from the borderlands, spoke volumes about his desperation. "Master Elias has shared some details of the curse with me," Alara said, deciding directness was her best approach. "I sense the connection between your condition and the trees. They are one and the same affliction." "Then you understand the true nature of the task before you," Magnus replied, moving away from the window to stand before her. "To heal the tree, you must confront the curse itself." In the closer proximity, Alara could feel the dark energy emanating from him more clearly. Not evil, but profoundly wounded, twisted by 2 decades of struggle against an insidious magic. "I cannot promise success," she said quietly, "but I will try, not for court favor or royal reward, but because healing is my calling." Something flickered in his amber eyes, perhaps surprise at her honesty, perhaps respect. "Why did you agree to come here? You must have known Gerard's motives were self-serving at best." Alara considered her answer carefully. "We had little choice. Lord Gerard made it clear that refusal would have consequences. My first duty is to protect my daughter." Magnus's expression darkened. "Gerard exceeded his authority. Coercion was not necessary." "Ambitious men rarely wait for necessity," she observed. To her surprise, a brief smile touched his lips, transforming his stern features. "You speak your mind freely for one unaccustomed to court." "I find directness saves time, Your Majesty, a luxury ill patience cannot afford." "Indeed." He studied her with renewed interest. "Tell me of your daughter. Diana, is it not? She shows remarkable spirit for one so young." The question seemed genuine rather than a mere courtesy, which intrigued Alara. "Diana has known both love and hardship. Her father was a warrior in the northern garrison. He fell defending a village from mountain raiders 12 years ago." "The same campaign that led to Morwen," Magnus noted, his expression somber. "Your husband served Blackwood well." "He served people who needed protection," Alara corrected gently. "Villagers who could not defend themselves. That was his true calling." Magnus inclined his head, accepting the subtle distinction. "And afterward? You raised your daughter alone in a border village?" "Not entirely alone. My mother-in-law took us in after Kieran fell. She was a healer before me, taught me much of what I know." Alara's voice softened with memory. "When she passed 5 years ago, Diana and I continued her work in Willowbrook." "And your unusual gift? Was that her teaching as well?" The question probed dangerous territory. Alara weighed her response, aware that admitting too much about her abilities could lead to accusations of witchcraft, especially in a kingdom scarred by Morwen's dark magic. "Some skills can be taught," she said carefully. "Others one is born with. My mother had similar gifts, though she hid them for safety's sake." "Yet you practice openly?" "Times have changed. People care less about the source of healing when their need is great enough." She met his gaze directly. "And my gift brings life, not death. Not, there is nothing dark in coaxing a plant to grow or easing a fever." Magnus nodded slowly. "Fair enough, though I wonder if you've told me the full truth of your abilities." Before Alara could respond, a sharp knock at the door interrupted them. Magnus frowned at the disturbance but called, "Enter." The door swung open to reveal Diana, her young face flushed with exertion and worry. Behind her stood a chagrined guard. "Forgive the intrusion, Your Majesty," the guard stammered. "The child insisted on seeing her mother immediately. She claimed it was urgent." Diana rushed to Alara's side, grasping her hand. "Mother, you were gone when I woke. I was worried." "I'm fine, dear heart," Elara assured her, squeezing her daughter's hand. "I was examining the royal tree and then speaking with His Majesty about our task." Diana looked up at Magnus, her initial fear giving way to curiosity. Unlike most who encountered the king, she seemed more intrigued than intimidated by his imposing presence. "Are you really as old as you look?" she asked bluntly. "Diana!" Elara gasped, mortified by her daughter's directness. To her astonishment, Magnus laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to surprise even him. "No, child, the curse ages me beyond my years. I am 58, though I appear much older." "The darkness inside you does that," Diana stated with absolute certainty. The study fell silent. Elara stared at her daughter in shock, while Magnus went utterly still. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Diana continued, apparently unaware of the impact of her words. "I can see it, like smoke under your skin. It's the same darkness that's in the big tree. It's hungry." Elara placed a protective arm around her daughter's shoulders. "Diana has always been perceptive," she explained hastily. "Children often speak in metaphors." "No," Magnus interrupted, his amber gaze fixed on Diana with new intensity. "Let her speak. What else do you see, child?" Diana tilted her head, studying the king with unnerving focus. "The darkness has roots, deep ones. They go all through the castle, all through you." She frowned in concentration. "But it's not supposed to be there. It doesn't belong to you." Magnus exchanged a meaningful glance with Elara over the girl's head. "Out of the mouths of children," he murmured. Then to Diana, "You have a rare gift, young one. Perhaps even rarer than your mother's." Diana shrugged, uncomfortable with the scrutiny. "I just see things sometimes. Mother says it's important not to talk about it with strangers." "Wise counsel," Magnus agreed, his expression softening. "Though I hope I will not remain a stranger for long." He moved to a side table and poured water from a silver pitcher into a simple clay cup. Offering it to Diana, he added, "Your mother and I have much to discuss about healing the royal tree. Would you like to explore the castle gardens with one of my trusted attendants? There is a remarkable fountain in the west courtyard that changes color with the sun's movement." Diana looked to Elara for permission, her earlier anxiety giving way to childish excitement at the prospect of exploration. "Go ahead," Elara encouraged after a moment's consideration, "but stay with the attendant at all times." Once Diana had been escorted from the study, Magnus turned back to Elara, his expression grave. "Your daughter can see the curse, not its effects, but its actual manifestation." He spoke the words with quiet certainty. "Such a gift is exceedingly rare." "Diana has always seen more than others," Elara acknowledged, seeing no point in further denial. "Since she was very small. At first, we thought it merely a child's imagination, but as she grew, the accuracy of her perceptions became undeniable." "Does she inherit this ability from you?" Elara shook her head. "Not from me. Her father's lineage included seers several generations back, though the gift had seemed dormant until Diana." Magnus moved to the window again, his posture reflecting internal struggle. What she described, darkness with roots, something foreign that doesn't belong, matches what I have felt these 20 years. Not simply a curse laid upon me, but something alive within me, feeding, growing. "A parasite rather than a punishment," Elara suggested, the healer in her automatically reframing the problem. "Yes." He turned back to her, something like hope flickering in his eyes. "Which means it might be removed or killed rather than simply endured." "Perhaps," she cautioned, "though curses of such power are seldom straightforward. There may be a price for its removal." "I have paid a price for 20 years," he replied grimly. "Watched my kingdom wither, my people suffer, my own body betray me. What further cost could there be?" The bitterness in his voice revealed the depth of his pain, not just physical aging, but the weight of responsibility for a dying realm. In that moment, Elara saw beyond the king to the man beneath the crown, carrying a burden few could comprehend. "I will do everything in my power to heal the tree," she promised softly, "and in doing so, perhaps find a way to address the curse itself. "Thank you," he said simply, the words carrying more weight from a man unaccustomed to expressing gratitude. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion outside the study door. Voices were raised in argument, one of them unmistakably Alaric's deep rumble. Magnus strode to the door and pulled it open. "What is the meaning of this disturbance?" he demanded. Alaric stood in the corridor, blocking Lord Gerard's path to the study. The younger Alpha's handsome face was flushed with anger. "Forgive me, Your Majesty," Alaric said stiffly. "Lord Gerard insisted on seeing you immediately, despite my explanation that you were in a private audience." "A private audience with the Omega Healer," Gerard interjected smoothly, his green eyes finding Alara standing behind Magnus. "Precisely the matter I wish to discuss. The Council is concerned about entrusting such an important task to an untested stranger, particularly one with no formal training or credentials." "The Council," Magnus repeated, his tone making it clear he understood Gerard spoke primarily for himself. "Strange that their concerns arise only after you presented her as a gift worthy of royal attention." Gerard's smile didn't waver. "Initial excitement has given way to prudent consideration. Several council members have suggested oversight of the healing process, perhaps a committee to ensure proper protocols are followed." "A committee," Magnus echoed, his voice dangerously soft. "To oversee a healing art none of them possess. To ensure transparency," Gerard insisted, "and to protect against unorthodox methods." The implication hung in the air, the specter of witchcraft, the fear of another Morwen. Alara felt cold anger rise within her. Gerard was already laying groundwork to discredit her if she succeeded or condemn her if she failed. "Lord Gerard," she spoke before Magnus could respond, stepping forward to stand beside the king. "Your concern for proper protocol is touching, especially given the informal manner in which you removed me from my village." Gerard's expression hardened slightly. "I offered you an opportunity to serve your kingdom at the highest level. Many would consider it an honor." "An honor typically extended as a request rather than a command," she countered, keeping her tone respectful but firm. "Nevertheless, I accepted King Magnus's challenge willingly and under his direct authority. Any oversight would interfere with the healing process, which requires focus and often solitude." "Well said, Lady Alara," Magnus interjected, using the honorific deliberately. "The matter is settled. You will proceed as you see fit, answerable only to me. Lord Gerard, your vigilance is noted, but unnecessary." Gerard bowed, his perfect courtier's mask back in place. "As your Majesty wishes, I merely sought to be of service." "Your service is most valuable in securing our borders," Magnus replied pointedly. "I understand the mountain raiders grow bolder. Perhaps your attention would be better directed there." The dismissal was clear. Gerard bowed again, deeper this time, but Alara didn't miss the flash of calculation in his eyes before he withdrew. "He will not give up so easily," Alaric observed once Gerard was out of earshot. "No," Magnus agreed. "He has invested too much in this gambit. If Lady Alara succeeds, he will claim credit for bringing her to court. If she fails, he will use it as evidence of my diminished judgment." "A win either way," Alara noted dryly. "Not quite," Magnus countered, a hint of his earlier smile returning. "He failed to account for your independence of mind. You are neither his puppet nor his pawn." "Few men of his position consider that possibility when dealing with an Omega," she replied. "Their mistake," Magnus said simply. The genuine respect in his tone caught Alara off guard. In her experience, even well-meaning alphas tended to view Omegas as lesser beings, to be protected certainly, but not treated as equals in intellect or will. "Your Majesty," Alaric interrupted, his expression troubled. "There is another matter requiring your attention. Reports from the northern border indicate unusual movement among the mountain clans." Magnus nodded, the momentary lightness leaving his features. "We will continue our discussion later, Lady Alara. For now, return to the royal tree. Learn what you can of its ailment. Alaric will ensure you have whatever supplies or assistance you require." "Thank you, Your Majesty." Alara curtsied and took her leave, her mind already turning back to the challenge of the dying tree. As she made her way through the castle corridors, she found herself reflecting on Magnus Blackthorn. The man behind the legendary king was more complex than stories suggested, not simply a warrior brought low by a witch's curse, but a ruler genuinely concerned for his people, carrying the weight of their suffering as his own. His interest in Diana had been surprising as well, curious rather than suspicious, despite her unusual perceptions. Perhaps most unexpected was the sense of connection Alara had felt in his presence. Not romantic. She had buried such notions alongside her husband 12 years ago, but a recognition of kindred spirits, both healers in their own way. She with her herbs and touch, he with his endurance of a curse that would have broken lesser men. The glass garden was quiet when she returned, the morning sun now streaming fully through the damaged dome. Alara approached the royal tree with renewed purpose, circling its massive trunk slowly, considering strategies. Traditional healing methods would be insufficient for a magical ailment of this magnitude. She would need to draw deeply on her innate gifts, the abilities she typically kept hidden from wary eyes. "Let us see what can be done for you," she murmured, placing both palms against the rough bark. Closing her eyes, Alara focused her awareness, pushing past the surface decay to the living core beneath. All plants had a life force, a current of vitality that could be sensed by those with the gift. The royal tree's energy was ancient and complex, layered with centuries of growth and memory. But twined throughout was the dark corruption, the same energy she had sensed in Magnus, though here it manifested differently, adapted to consume a different kind of life. For nearly an hour, Alara remained motionless, her consciousness merged with the trees, exploring the extent of the damage and the nature of the parasitic force. When she finally withdrew, opening her eyes and stepping back, her face was pale with exertion, but her expression determined. "You've been fighting alone for too long," she told the tree softly. "That changes today." From the pouch at her waist, she removed several small packets of herbs, some common, others rare, and carefully harvested during specific moon phases. She knelt at the base of the tree and began to prepare a mixture, grinding dried leaves and roots with a small mortar and pestle she had brought from her chambers. As she worked, Alara became aware of being watched. Looking up, she saw a young boy of perhaps 14 standing at the garden entrance, observing her with undisguised curiosity. His resemblance to Alaric was unmistakable. The same strong features and direct gaze, though his expression held a youthful openness the betas no longer possessed. "You're the healer everyone's talking about," the boy stated, approaching with confident steps, "the one who's going to cure the royal tree." "I'm Alara," she confirmed, continuing her work. "And you must be Alaric's son." The boy nodded, pleased to be recognized. "Cormac, Father says you have a special gift, that you might succeed where all the royal physicians have failed." "Your father is kind to have such confidence," Alara replied diplomatically. "I'm merely doing what I can with the knowledge and abilities I possess." Cormac crouched beside her, fascinated by the herbs she was mixing. "Is that starflower? My grandmother used to grow it for fever remedies." "Good eye," Alara acknowledged, impressed by his recognition of the dried blue petals. "It's also effective for drawing out impurities when applied externally." "Can I help?" the boy asked eagerly. "I've studied some basic healing arts with Master Elias. He says I have potential." Alara considered him for a moment, then nodded. "Fetch me fresh water, rainwater if possible, from a cistern rather than the well. And clean cloths, as many as you can find." Cormac hurried off, clearly pleased to be given a real task rather than dismissed as a child. While he was gone, Alara continued preparing her remedy, adding small amounts of a golden oil she had pressed herself from rare mountain flowers. The final ingredient came from a tiny vial she kept hidden in a secret pocket of her dress. 3 drops of her own blood, added with a whispered prayer to the old gods. Blood magic was not inherently dark, despite Morwen's perversion of it. In its purest form, freely given, blood carried the essence of life itself, the most potent catalyst for healing magic. When Cormac returned with a bucket of rainwater and an armful of clean linen, Alara had already created a thick paste with her herbal mixture. Together they soaked the cloths in the rainwater and wrapped them around the tree's roots where they emerged from the soil, then covered the wet cloths with the herbal paste. "Now what?" Cormac asked, wiping his hands on his tunic. "Now we wait," Alara replied, sitting back on her heels. "This is merely the first treatment. The remedy needs time to draw out some of the corruption, making it easier to address the core infection." "Like lancing a boil before treating the underlying illness," the boy suggested, revealing his medical knowledge. "Precisely," Alara smiled at him. "You do have potential, as Master Elias said." Cormac beamed at the praise. "Will you tell me about other remedies? We have herbs here in the royal gardens I've never worked with." As they continued talking, Alara found herself warming to the boy's earnest curiosity. His questions were intelligent and his enthusiasm genuine. She had just begun explaining the properties of a particularly rare herb when a shadow fell across them. "Making friends already, I see." The silky voice belonged to Lord Gerard, who stood watching them with an unreadable expression. Beside him was a woman Alara recognized from the council meeting, Lady Seraphina, his cousin and closest advisor. Cormac scrambled to his feet, offering a hasty bow. "Lord Gerard, Lady Seraphina, I was assisting Lady Alara with her treatment of the royal tree." "How diligent," Gerard remarked, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Run along now, boy. Lady Alara and I have matters to discuss." Cormac glanced uncertainly at Alara, who nodded slightly. "Thank you for your help, Cormac. Perhaps you can return tomorrow if your father permits." Once the boy had departed, Gerard circled the tree, examining their work with a critical eye. Interesting methods. Cloths and paste rather than the potions and incantations one might expect for such a momentous task. "Healing often begins with simple remedies," Alara replied, rising to her feet to meet his gaze more directly. "The foundations must be laid before the walls can rise." "Poetic," Lady Seraphina commented, her voice cool and precise. "But King Magnus's condition worsens daily. The kingdom cannot afford a gradual approach." Alara tensed at the direct reference to the connection between king and tree. "You speak as if you know much about healing, my lady." "I know about results," Seraphina replied, "and the consequences of failure." The threat was thinly veiled, but Gerard smoothly interjected before Alara could respond. "What my cousin means is that we all wish for your swift success. The king's welfare, and by extension the kingdom's, depends upon it." "Indeed," Alara said neutrally. "Then you'll understand my need to return to my work without distraction." Gerard stepped closer, lowering his voice though his smile remained fixed. "I brought you to court as a gesture of goodwill, Lady Alara. It would be a shame if your remarkable talents proved inadequate to the task." "Or if those talents raised uncomfortable questions," Seraphina added silkily. "The line between healer and witch is perilously thin in these troubled times." The implied threat hung in the air between them. Alara maintained her composure with effort, though anger burned in her chest. "I serve the king directly, as he commanded. If you have concerns about my methods, I suggest you raise them with His Majesty." Gerard's expression hardened momentarily before smoothing into practiced affability. "No concerns at all. Merely friendly advice from one who understands court politics better than a village healer might." He offered a perfect courtier's bow. "We shall leave you to your work. Come, Seraphina." As they departed, Alara released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The encounter confirmed what she had suspected. Gerard had not brought her to court out of loyalty to the king or concern for the kingdom. He was playing a more complex game, one in which she was merely a piece on the board. What he failed to understand was that she had no intention of playing by his rules. Her duty was to the tree, to the king whose life force was bound to it, and to her daughter whose safety depended on her success. All else, court politics, Gerard's machinations, even the suspicion her methods might arouse, was secondary. Alara turned back to the royal tree, placing her palm once more against its ancient bark. "We have enemies in common, it seems," she murmured. "Let us show them the strength that flows in your roots, the power that has sustained Blackwood for centuries." Beneath her touch, she imagined she felt a faint response, not health returning, not yet, but perhaps a stirring of recognition, of resistance against the darkness that had claimed it for too long. The first week passed swiftly as Alara established her routine with the royal tree. Each morning she arrived at dawn, replacing the herbal compresses and monitoring the slow changes in the ancient oak. Each evening she reviewed ancient texts from the royal library, searching for precedents and remedies that might apply to a curse of such magnitude. The work was exhausting but absorbing, allowing her little time to worry about court politics or Gerard's veiled threats. Diana, meanwhile, had adapted to castle life with surprising ease. She spent her days exploring the safer areas of the grounds, often accompanied by Cormac, who had appointed himself her unofficial guide. The young alpha's protective attitude toward Diana amused Alara, though she sensed a genuine friendship developing between the children despite their different backgrounds. On the 7th evening, Alara sat alone in her chambers, poring over a particularly ancient tome borrowed from Master Elias. The text, Curses and Their Remedies, was written in an archaic dialect that made translation difficult, but one passage had captured her attention. When a curse binds a man to darkness, seek the light that complements his nature. For curses of the blood require blood freely given. Curses of the spirit require spirit willingly shared. The healer must become the bridge between affliction and cure, offering of themselves what the cursed cannot give. The implications troubled her. If Morwen's curse truly operated as a parasitic entity rather than a simple magical affliction, healing it might require more than herbs and incantations. It might require a personal sacrifice, a literal giving of herself to counteract the darkness. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Expecting Diana returning from dinner, she called, "Enter." To her surprise, King Magnus himself stood in the doorway. Without his ceremonial attire, dressed in a simple black tunic and trousers, he seemed both less imposing and somehow more powerful, the man rather than the monarch. "Your Majesty," Alara said, quickly rising and curtsying. Magnus gestured for her to remain seated. "Forgive the unexpected visit. I wish to speak with you privately, away from curious eyes and ears." "Of course." Alara indicated a chair near her own by the fireplace. "Please." Magnus entered, closing the door behind him. As he moved to the offered seat, Alara noticed a slight stiffness in his movements, a careful control suggesting pain beneath the regal bearing. "You've been working with the royal tree for a week now," he began without preamble. "I'd like your honest assessment of its condition, and by extension, the prospects for my kingdom." The directness of the question spoke to the urgency he felt. Alara considered her response carefully. "The damage is extensive, as you know. The darkness has infiltrated the tree's core, converting its life energy into something corrupt." She met his gaze steadily. "But there are signs of response to my treatments, small changes that suggest the tree is not yet beyond saving." "And these treatments, they're working?" "They're preliminary steps," she explained, "drawing out the surface corruption to better access the deeper infection, like cleansing a wound before attempting to heal the flesh beneath." Magnus nodded, his amber eyes reflecting the firelight. "And have you determined what the deeper healing will require?" The question touched directly on her earlier concerns. Alara glanced at the open book on her table, weighing how much to reveal. "I'm still researching," she said cautiously. "Curses of this magnitude are rare, and their remedies often personalized to the specific affliction." "Meaning?" "Meaning that undoing Morwen's work may require more than conventional healing methods." She hesitated, then added, "The curse is bound to you personally, Your Majesty. The tree is merely its conduit to the kingdom. To truly heal Blackwood, we must address the root of the curse within you." Magnus was silent for a long moment, studying her with an intensity that would have been unnerving if Alara hadn't become somewhat accustomed to his penetrating gaze. "You speak of the curse as if it were a living thing," he observed finally. "Because I believe it is," she replied. "Not alive in the sense of a person or animal, but more like a parasitic growth that has developed its own survival instincts. It feeds on your life force, using the connection between monarch and realm to spread its corruption throughout Blackwood." "And how does one kill such a parasite?" Again, the directness of his question gave her pause. The truth might offer hope, but it also carried significant risk, to herself and to Diana if things went wrong. The texts suggest that powerful curses can be broken through equally powerful counter-magic, she said carefully, often requiring a form of sacrifice or exchange, something of equivalent value freely given to balance what was taken by force. Blood magic, Magnus stated flatly. Not necessarily, Alara countered, though in truth, blood would likely play some role in any remedy powerful enough to counter Morwen's curse. There are other forms of deep magic, bonds of loyalty, acts of selfless compassion, willing sacrifices made not for power, but for healing. Magnus leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. You speak of magic with unusual frankness for one living in a kingdom where such practices are viewed with suspicion. I speak of healing, Alara replied. The methods matter less than the intent behind them. Morwen used blood and pain to create suffering. To counter her work requires the opposite, healing freely offered, power used to restore rather than corrupt. And you possess such power? The question hung between them, loaded with potential danger. Admission of magical abilities beyond simple herb lore could easily be construed as witchcraft, particularly by those like Gerard, who might benefit from such accusations. I have gifts, Alara acknowledged carefully, passed down through my mother's line, the ability to sense life forces, to encourage healing and growth. Nothing as dramatic as the tales tell of Morwen, but perhaps sufficient to address the curse's hold on the royal tree. And on me? Magnus asked quietly. Their eyes met, and in his amber gaze Alara saw not suspicion, but a carefully controlled hope. The first, perhaps, he had allowed himself in 20 years of suffering. That remains to be seen, she answered honestly. The connection between you and the tree is profound. As I work with one, I may be able to affect the other. Magnus nodded, seemingly satisfied with her cautious response. What do you require for your work? Resources, materials, assistance, name them, and they're yours. Access to the royal archives has been most helpful, Alara said, and I would request permission to gather certain plants from the royal forests at specific times. Some remedies require herbs collected under particular moon phases. Granted, Magnus replied immediately. Alaric will arrange an escort whenever you need to leave the castle grounds. Thank you, Your Majesty. She hesitated, then added, There is one other matter. My daughter Diana. The child with second sight, Magnus nodded. She is well? Yes, but her gift concerns me in the present circumstances. She sees the curse more clearly than most, which may place her at risk if certain parties learned of her ability. Magnus's expression darkened. You speak of Gerard. Among others, Alara confirmed, those who might view such gifts as threatening or useful for their own purposes. The girl is under my protection, Magnus stated firmly. As are you. No harm will come to either of you within my walls. The vehemence of his declaration surprised Alara. Despite his reputation as a just ruler, such personal concern for a village healer and her daughter seemed unexpected. May I ask why you've taken such interest in our welfare? She ventured, beyond my potential usefulness in addressing the curse. Magnus regarded her thoughtfully before responding. 20 years ago, I led men into battle against Morwen. Many died following my command, including, it seems, your husband. Their sacrifice protected this kingdom, yet I could not protect them from the witch's final vengeance. The curse that afflicts me has spread suffering throughout Blackwood, touching countless innocent lives. He leaned forward, his gaze intensifying. If there is even the slightest chance that you can end this curse, that your daughter's unique perception might contribute to that end, then your safety becomes the kingdom's highest priority, not merely for what you might do, but for who you are. Blackwood has lost too many good souls to darkness already. The sincerity in his voice touched something in Alara she had thought long dormant. Since Kieran's death, she had focused exclusively on survival and Diana's well-being, setting aside any broader connections or purposes. Yet now, facing this king who carried the weight of an entire kingdom's suffering as his personal burden, she felt a stirring of something deeper, a call to healing that transcended individual patients. "I understand," she said simply, "and I will do everything within my power to heal both tree and king." Magnus nodded, seemingly satisfied. He rose to leave but paused, his expression shifting to one of curiosity. "Your daughter mentioned that you tell stories of the old days, tales passed down from your mother and grandmother. What kind of stories?" The question seemed oddly personal coming from a king, but Alara answered readily. "Stories of the land and its guardians, how the first kings of these realms made pacts with forest spirits, how the balance between light and shadow must be maintained for the world to flourish. Tales that modern minds dismiss as superstition, but which contain kernels of older truths." "I'd like to hear them someday," Magnus said, surprising her again. "Perhaps they contain wisdom relevant to our current situation." "Perhaps," Alara agreed, "though I doubt royal ears are accustomed to such simple fare." A brief smile touched Magnus's lips, transforming his stern features. "You'd be surprised what royal ears might appreciate after decades of courtly flattery and empty eloquence. Good night, Lady Alara." After he departed, Alara remained by the fire, turning their conversation over in her mind. The king was a more complex man than stories suggested, thoughtful beneath his warrior's exterior, carrying his burden with a dignity that commanded respect. Working to heal him and his kingdom suddenly felt less like an imposed task and more like a calling she could embrace willingly. With renewed purpose, she returned to her ancient text, searching for the specific rituals that might bridge the gap between curse and cure. The next morning dawned gray and chill, a fine mist clinging to the castle grounds as Alara made her way to the glass garden. The season was advancing toward winter, adding urgency to her work. If the royal tree didn't show significant improvement before the first frost, its weakened state might not survive the cold months ahead. As she approached the garden entrance, a prickling sensation at the back of her neck warned her of observation. Pausing, she scanned the surrounding area, catching a flicker of movement in an upper window of the east tower. The face was too distant to identify clearly, but the intensity of the gaze left little doubt. Someone was monitoring her activities with more than casual interest. Inside the glass garden, Alara found the royal tree much as she had left it the previous evening, though she noted with satisfaction that the herbal compresses had darkened significantly, a sign they were drawing out corruption as intended. Removing them carefully, she was pleased to see the bark beneath appeared marginally healthier, with fewer blackened streaks visible. "You're fighting," she murmured to the ancient oak. "Good. Hold fast a while longer." She prepared fresh compresses with a stronger mixture of herbs, adding several rare ingredients she had requested from the royal stores. As she worked, she hummed softly, an old melody her grandmother had taught her, said to encourage plants to grow stronger. A curious method of healing. The voice startled her. Turning, Alara found Lady Seraphina standing just inside the garden entrance, observing with cool assessment. Unlike their previous encounter, Gerard was nowhere in sight. "Lady Seraphina," Alara acknowledged with a polite nod, continuing her work. "I find traditional methods often complement newer techniques." "Traditional," Seraphina repeated, moving closer to examine the herbal mixture. "Some might call it primitive, or perhaps something else entirely." The implication was clear. Alara kept her expression neutral as she applied the fresh compresses to the tree's exposed roots. "Healing takes many forms," she replied evenly. "What matters is the outcome, not the method." "Indeed." Seraphina circled the tree, her elegant green gown rustling against the stone floor. "And what outcome do you foresee, healer? The tree showing miraculous improvement? The king suddenly restored to youth and vigor?" "I make no promises beyond my best efforts," Alara said, "though the tree has already shown some response to treatment." "Has it?" Seraphina's tone suggested skepticism. "I see the same dying giant that has blighted the glass garden for years." "Healing is often invisible in its early stages," Alara explained, keeping her voice professionally detached despite her growing wariness, "like a fever breaking before strength returns." Serafina paused in her circuit of the tree, fixing Alara with a penetrating stare. "You've spoken privately with the king." It wasn't a question. Alara wondered how Serafina had learned of Magnus's visit to her chambers. The castle clearly had eyes and ears in unexpected places. "His Majesty wished for a progress report," she confirmed, seeing no benefit in denial. "Naturally." Serafina's smile didn't reach her eyes. "And did you report your unusual methods? The singing, the blood added to your mixtures when you think no one is watching?" Ice slid down Alara's spine. She had been extremely careful with the blood component of her remedies, always ensuring privacy before adding the crucial ingredient. That Serafina knew of it suggested either magical surveillance or an informant very close to Alara's work. "I reported what was relevant to His Majesty's understanding of the healing process," she replied carefully. "How discreet?" Serafina moved closer, her voice dropping to a confidential murmur. "Let us speak plainly, healer. You practice arts that skirt dangerously close to those that saw more when executed. In most circumstances, such discoveries would lead to similar accusations." Alara tensed, her hand instinctively moving to the small knife concealed in her sleeve, not as a weapon, but as a focus for defensive magic if needed. "Yet here you stand, unmolested and even encouraged in your work," Serafina continued. "Do you know why?" "Because the king values results over superstition," Alara suggested, though she suspected Serafina had a different explanation in mind. The noblewoman's laugh was like glass breaking. "Because you serve a purpose in the greater design. Your methods, suspicious as they may be, are tolerated while useful. But usefulness is temporary, particularly when one's methods might easily be reframed as witchcraft once their utility ends." "Is that a threat, Lady Serafina?" "Merely an observation on the precarious nature of your position." She traced a finger along the tree's bark, her expression thoughtful. "Though it need not remain precarious, allies at court can provide more lasting protection than a king's temporary favor." The offer was as clear as it was unexpected. Serafina was proposing an alliance, or more accurately, suggesting Alara shift her loyalty from Magnus to Gerard's faction. "I serve the king and the kingdom of Blackwood," Alara stated firmly. "My work with the royal tree is undertaken in good faith, with no political agenda." "Everyone has an agenda, healer." Serafina's smile turned pitying. "Even those who claim to stand above politics. Consider carefully where your true security lies, and your daughter's. The king's protection extends only as far as his power, which wanes with each passing day." Before Alara could respond, the garden door opened again, admitting Diana and Cormac. The children halted upon seeing Lady Serafina, Cormac offering a hasty bow, while Diana simply studied the noblewoman with unconcealed curiosity. "Ah, the young ones," Serafina remarked, her manner shifting instantly to one of aristocratic benevolence. "Exploring the castle, are we?" "Mother asked us to bring fresh water for the tree," Diana explained, indicating the covered bucket Cormac carried. "How diligent." Serafina's gaze lingered on Diana, her expression calculating. "Your daughter has your eyes, Lady Alara. One wonders what else she might have inherited." The implied threat toward Diana sparked a fierce protectiveness in Alara. "My daughter inherits my dedication to healing and truth, Lady Serafina, values that serve Blackwood well in these troubled times." The rebuke was subtle but clear. Serafina inclined her head in acknowledgement of the verbal parry. "Indeed. Well, I shall leave you to your work, until we meet again." With a rustle of expensive fabric, she departed, leaving a chill in the air that had nothing to do with the autumn weather. "I don't like her," Diana declared once Serafina was safely gone. "She has shadows following her." Alara exchanged a quick glance with Cormac, who looked uncomfortably aware of the potential danger in such observations. "Diana," Alara said gently, "remember what we discussed about private observations?" The girl nodded solemnly. "Keep them private unless we're alone." "Exactly." Alara turned to Cormac, whose young face showed a maturity beyond his years. "Thank you for accompanying my daughter, Cormac." Your friendship is a comfort to us both." The boy straightened with pride at her words. "Father says the king has ordered extra guards for you and Diana. He's concerned about interference with your work." So Magnus was already moving to counter potential threats from Gerard's faction. The knowledge should have been reassuring, yet Alara felt the situation spinning toward a confrontation she had hoped to avoid. Her primary goal was healing the tree, and by extension, the king. Political maneuvering would only complicate an already difficult task. "Let's focus on today's work," she suggested, accepting the bucket of water from Cormac. "The tree needs our attention more than court politics." As the children helped her tend to the royal tree, Alara's mind kept returning to Seraphina's warning. The noblewoman was right about one thing. Her position was precarious. If her methods were exposed as magical rather than merely herbal, accusations of witchcraft could follow swiftly, particularly from those who opposed the king. Yet abandoning Magnus to curry favor with Gerard was unthinkable, not merely because of her integrity, but because she genuinely believed the king deserved healing, both for himself and for the kingdom he so clearly loved. In the week since her arrival, she had seen enough of Magnus Blackthorne to recognize a ruler worthy of loyalty, curse notwithstanding. That evening, rather than returning to her chambers after dinner, Alara made her way to the royal library where Elias had promised to share some newly discovered texts relevant to her work. The vast room was dimly lit, most of the torches extinguished for the night, but a single lamp burned at a far table where the elderly physician waited. "Lady Alara," he greeted her, rising stiffly. "Thank you for coming at this late hour. I thought privacy would serve our purpose better than convenience." "A wise precaution," she agreed, taking the seat he offered. "I had an interesting conversation with Lady Seraphina this morning." Elias's expression darkened. "That woman sees too much and speaks too cleverly for anyone's good. What did she want?" "To suggest that my position is precarious and that Gerard's faction might offer more lasting protection than the king's favor." "Ah." The old man nodded grimly. "The opening gambit. If you had shown interest, more concrete offers would have followed." "I made my loyalty to the king quite clear," Alara assured him. "Good, though it will likely make your path more difficult." Elias pushed a worn leather volume across the table. "This may help navigate the challenges ahead. It's from the restricted collection. Texts dealing with magic and its various applications, kept separate from the main library for obvious reasons." Alara examined the book with interest. Its cover bore no title, only an embossed symbol of a tree entwined with a crown, the ancient emblem of Blackwood, before modern heraldry simplified it to the lone crown now used. "The Binding of Realms," Elias explained, keeping his voice low despite their solitude. "Written during the founding of Blackwood, when the first king established the magical connection between the royal tree, the monarch's bloodline, and the land itself." "The source of the connection that Morwen's curse exploits," Alara realized, opening the book carefully. "Precisely." Elias turned the brittle pages until he found a specific illustration, an intricate diagram showing energy flowing between a crowned figure, a great tree, and the surrounding landscape. The original binding was a sacred ritual, a covenant between ruler and realm. The monarch pledged to protect and nurture the land. In return, the land's vitality strengthened the monarch. "A symbiotic relationship," Alara murmured, studying the ancient text. "But Morwen's curse inverted it, creating a parasitic drain instead." "Yes, though the mechanism remains the same. The connection still exists. It merely flows backward, carrying corruption rather than vitality." Elias pointed to another passage. "What interests me most is this section on rebalancing the covenant when it falls out of alignment." Alara leaned closer, translating the archaic script slowly. "When darkness taints the sacred bond, seek the one whose nature complements the monarch's essence. In the joining of opposites lies the path to restoration." "Opposites," Elias repeated meaningfully. "Magnus is an alpha whose curse brings death and decay. You are—" "An omega with gifts of healing and growth," Alara finished, a chill running through her as the implication became clear. Elias nodded solemnly. I believe your arrival at court was no coincidence, regardless of Gerard's machinations. The ancient magics that underlie Blackwood may have drawn you here precisely because you possess what is needed to counter the curse. The joining of opposites, Elara echoed, her mind racing with possibilities and concerns. What exactly does this joining entail? The old healer's expression grew cautious. The text is deliberately vague on specifics. Such knowledge was considered too powerful to record explicitly, but it suggests a ritual of deep connection, a willing exchange of essence between healer and afflicted. Blood magic, Elara stated flatly, echoing Magnus's earlier assessment. Of a sort, Elias conceded. Though not the dark perversion more when practiced, this would be freely given, an act of healing rather than harm. Elara sat back, absorbing the implications. The joining the text described sounded perilously close to a mating bond, the deepest connection possible between Alpha and Omega, permanent and life-altering. Such bonds were rare in modern times, replaced by more pragmatic political marriages among the nobility or simple pair bonds among commoners. "Does the king know of this text?" she asked finally. "Not yet," Elias admitted. "I wanted to consult you first, given the personal nature of what might be required." Personal indeed. Elara had never considered a second bond after Kieran's death. Her life had been devoted to Diana and to healing others, with no room for romantic entanglements. The prospect of forming a magical bond with Magnus, a king no less, was as daunting as it was unexpected. "We should speak with His Majesty together," she decided. "He deserves to know all possible approaches to breaking the curse, however unconventional." Elias nodded, looking relieved that she hadn't dismissed the idea outright. "There is wisdom in transparency, though I caution discretion, if Gerard's faction learned of this possibility." He didn't need to finish the thought. If a ritual bond between Magnus and an Omega healer could potentially break the curse and restore both king and kingdom, Gerard would have every reason to prevent such a ceremony. His entire claim to power rested on Magnus's continued affliction. "When can we speak with the king?" Elara asked. "Tomorrow evening," Elias suggested. "He holds private council in his study after the day's formal business concludes. I can arrange for your presence to be requested without arousing undue curiosity." As they finalized their plans, neither noticed the shadowy figure who slipped away from behind a nearby bookshelf, moving silently toward the library's side exit. The following day dawned bright and cold, the first true frost of the season glittering across the castle grounds. Elara woke with a sense of foreboding that she couldn't quite place, a heaviness in the air that had nothing to do with the weather. After breakfast, she made her way to the glass garden as usual, only to find the entrance guarded by two of Gerard's personal soldiers rather than the regular castle guards. "Lady Elara," one acknowledged with minimal courtesy. "Lord Gerard has ordered an inspection of your work with the royal tree. No one is to enter until the inspection is complete." "On whose authority does Lord Gerard presume to interfere with a task assigned directly by the king?" Elara demanded, keeping her voice level despite her rising anger. "The council has expressed concerns about unorthodox methods," the guard replied, clearly reciting prepared lines. "Lord Gerard acts with their collective approval to ensure all activities benefit the kingdom." Before Elara could argue further, the garden doors opened to reveal Gerard himself, accompanied by Lady Seraphina and two other nobles she recognized from the council meeting. "Ah, Lady Elara," Gerard greeted her with practiced charm. "Perfect timing. We've just completed our preliminary assessment of your work with the royal tree." "Without my presence or consent," she noted coldly. "A necessary precaution," he replied smoothly. "When concerns arise about potentially dangerous practices, objective evaluation becomes essential." "What concerns?" she challenged. "And what dangerous practices do you imagine I'm employing?" Gerard exchanged a glance with Seraphina before responding. "Blood rituals, for one. Several witnesses have observed you adding your own blood to the remedies applied to the royal tree, a practice uncomfortably reminiscent of the Witch Morwen's work." The accusation hung in the air like poison. Elara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning frost. Someone had indeed been watching her most private moments of work, reporting back to Gerard with damning details. Blood freely given for healing bears no resemblance to blood taken by force for corruption, she stated firmly. Any knowledgeable healer understands the distinction. A convenient justification, Serafina interjected smoothly, but one that fails to address the fundamental concern that you're employing magical practices without council oversight or approval. My methods were approved by the king himself, Alara countered. I made no secret of my approach when accepting the task. Yet you concealed specific details, Gerard observed, his tone regretful, though his eyes remained calculating. The council has voted to suspend your work with the royal tree pending a full investigation of your methods. For the kingdom's safety, you understand. Fury rose in Alara's chest, but she forced herself to remain outwardly calm. Losing composure would only reinforce their portrayal of her as potentially dangerous. "And has the king approved this suspension?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "His Majesty is indisposed this morning," Gerard replied smoothly. "A particularly severe manifestation of his condition. The council acts in his stead until he recovers." The timing was too convenient to be coincidence. Whether through natural progression or more sinister means, Magnus's incapacitation served Gerard's purposes perfectly, allowing him to move against Alara without royal interference. "I see," she said coldly. "And am I to be formally accused of witchcraft, or merely prevented from completing my assigned task?" "That depends entirely on the investigation's findings," Gerard replied. "For now, you remain an honored guest at court, though access to certain areas, including this garden, will be restricted for everyone's safety." The implicit threat was clear. Accusations of witchcraft carried the severest penalties, but Gerard was offering a tacit bargain: cooperate with the suspension, and more serious charges might be avoided. "And my daughter?" Alara asked, her primary concern always Diana's safety. "Remains under the king's protection, as promised," Gerard assured her, his tone suggesting magnanimity. "We are not barbarians, Lady Alara. Our concern is with dangerous practices, not with punishing innocent children." Small comfort, but better than the alternative. Alara nodded stiffly, seeing no immediate path forward but strategic retreat. "If that is the council's decision, I will of course comply while the matter is clarified with His Majesty." She fixed Gerard with a steady gaze. "Though I caution against leaving the royal tree untreated for long. The progress made could quickly reverse without continued attention." "Duly noted," Gerard replied, his smile suggesting he cared little for the tree's welfare compared to the political advantage he had just gained. As Alara turned to leave, Lady Serafina called after her, "Consider our earlier conversation, healer. Opportunities for realignment remain available to those with wisdom to recognize changing tides." The offer was as transparent as it was calculating. Switch allegiance to Gerard's faction, and the accusations would likely disappear. Alara gave no response beyond a cold glance before walking away, her mind already racing with possible countermoves. Her immediate priority was contacting Magnus, assuming his indisposition wasn't severe enough to prevent communication entirely. After that, she needed to secure Diana. If Gerard had moved this openly against her, her daughter might become a secondary target or leverage point. As she hurried through the castle corridors, Alara nearly collided with Alaric, who appeared to be searching for her with equal urgency. "Lady Alara," the beta greeted her, relief evident in his voice. "I was just coming to find you. The king requests your presence immediately." "He's conscious, then?" she asked, falling into step beside Alaric as he led her toward the royal chambers. "Lord Gerard claimed he was severely afflicted this morning." Alaric's expression darkened. "Gerard exaggerates for his own purposes. Magnus experienced a difficult night, true, but he is fully alert and exceedingly angry about the council's unauthorized actions." Hope flared in Alara's chest. "Then he doesn't support the suspension of my work with the royal tree?" "Quite the opposite," Alaric assured her. "When news reached him of the council's vote, he demanded your immediate attendance. Witnesses be damned." The beta led her not to Magnus's formal audience chamber, but to his private quarters, a clear indication of both urgency and the king's physical state. 2 royal guards stood outside the heavy oak door, their postures alert despite their stoic expressions. "Lady Alara to see His Majesty, as commanded," Alaric announced. The guards admitted them to an antechamber, then through to a spacious bedroom dominated by a massive 4-poster bed. Magnus sat propped against pillows, his face pale, but his amber eyes burning with poorly contained fury. Master Elias stood nearby, mixing something in a small bowl. "Leave us," Magnus ordered the moment Alara entered. "All of you." Alaric hesitated. "Your Majesty, in your condition—" "Out," Magnus repeated, his voice carrying the unmistakable command of an alpha, despite his weakened state. When the door closed behind the others, Magnus gestured Alara closer. "Gerard moves faster than anticipated. Tell me exactly what happened." As Alara recounted the morning's confrontation, she observed Magnus more closely. The king's condition had indeed deteriorated since their last meeting. New lines etched his face, and silver streaked his beard where dark hairs had been just days before. Most telling was the effort each movement clearly cost him, the curse advancing more rapidly than she had feared. "Blood magic," Magnus repeated when she finished her account. "A predictable accusation, though I'm surprised Gerard gathered evidence so quickly. He must have had you watched from the beginning." "The timing is suspicious," Alara noted. "Your condition worsening just as Gerard moves to suspend my work with the tree." "More than suspicious," Magnus agreed grimly. "Last night I experienced pain unlike any since the curse's early days. It felt targeted, as if something was deliberately attacking the connection between myself and the royal tree." A chill ran down Alara's spine. "You believe Gerard has found a way to manipulate the curse?" "Or someone working with him has," Magnus confirmed, "which makes your discovery with Elias all the more crucial. He shared the ancient text with me this morning before Gerard's faction intervened." So Elias had moved faster than planned, recognizing the growing danger. Alara felt a surge of gratitude for the old physician's foresight. "The joining of opposites," she said quietly. "A ritual bond to counteract the curse's corruption." "A dangerous proposition," Magnus acknowledged, his amber eyes studying her intently. "Particularly for you. Such a bond would be permanent, irreversible, far more than a political alliance or even a marriage contract." The implications hung in the air between them. What the ancient text suggested was nothing less than a complete magical and physical union, Alpha and Omega, death and life, shadow and light, bound together to rebalance what Morwen's curse had distorted. "There are other considerations as well," Alara said carefully. "My daughter—" "Would be protected as my own," Magnus interrupted with unexpected vehemence. "Should we proceed with such a bonding, Diana would become Princess of Blackwood in truth, not merely courtesy." The offer was as generous as it was unexpected. Royal adoption of a commoner's child was virtually unheard of, particularly in a realm as traditional as Blackwood. "You would do that?" Alara asked, searching his face for signs of political calculation rather than genuine intent. "I would," Magnus confirmed, holding her gaze steadily. "Not merely as compensation for what would be asked of you, but because the child deserves security after all she has endured. Her gifts are remarkable, her spirit equally so. Blackwood would be fortunate to claim her as a daughter of the realm." Warmth bloomed in Alara's chest at his words. Not romantic attraction, but something deeper. Recognition of a man whose values aligned with her own, whose sense of responsibility extended beyond political advantage to genuine care for those under his protection. "The ritual itself remains unclear," she noted, returning to practical concerns. The text Elias found was deliberately vague on specifics. "A common practice with the most powerful magics," Magnus agreed. "Those who recorded such knowledge often feared its misuse by future generations. However," he paused, seeming to consider how much to reveal. "There are older records, kept not in the royal library but in the sacred grove beyond the northern wall. Texts accessible only to the monarch and royal consort, passed down from Blackwood's founding. You believe they might contain the specific ritual we need? "It's possible," he replied. "The grove itself is tied to the original covenant between ruler and realm, the same connection the curse has corrupted. If anywhere holds the knowledge we seek, it would be there." Alara absorbed this new information, her mind racing with possibilities and concerns. How soon could we access these records? "That's the difficulty," Magnus admitted, frustration evident in his voice. "In my current state, I lack the strength to reach the grove. It lies a mile beyond the castle walls, accessible only by a hidden path. And with Gerard's faction now openly moving against your work, any attempt to leave the castle together would almost certainly be intercepted. The strategic challenge was clear. They needed access to knowledge contained in a location Magnus was too weak to reach, while Gerard's people were actively working to prevent Alara from continuing her healing efforts. "There may be another way," Alara said slowly, an idea forming. "You mentioned the grove is accessible to the monarch and royal consort. Does that restriction apply to the physical location or to the knowledge itself?" Magnus considered the question carefully. "The knowledge, primarily. The grove's location is obscured by ancient magics. Those not of royal blood or formally bound to it simply cannot find the path, though they might stand mere feet from its entrance." "And Diana?" Alara asked. "Her ability to see magical energies might allow her to perceive what others cannot." Understanding dawned in Magnus's eyes. "You propose sending the child to find what we cannot reach ourselves." "Not alone," Alara clarified quickly, "but perhaps with Cormac as her companion. The boy knows the castle grounds well, and his father's position would allow them to move more freely than I could right now." Magnus was silent for a long moment, weighing the risks. "It would place both children in potential danger," he noted finally, "though perhaps less danger than doing nothing while Gerard consolidates his power." "Diana is stronger than she appears," Alara assured him, "and more capable than most would assume. If anyone can find a hidden magical path, it would be her." Decision crystallized in Magnus's amber eyes. "Very well. We'll proceed on two fronts. The children will seek the grove and the knowledge it contains, while you and I address Gerard's accusations directly. If he wishes to claim you practice blood magic, let him do so before the full council with the king present." "A dangerous gambit," Alara observed. "Accusations of witchcraft, once formally levied, develop lives of their own." "Indeed," Magnus agreed, a grim smile touching his lips. "But I am still king, curse notwithstanding, and no council vote supersedes royal authority, particularly in matters of magic that affect the realm itself." For the first time since arriving at court, Alara felt the full weight of what she had become involved in. Not merely a healing challenge, but a political and magical struggle with the fate of an entire kingdom hanging in the balance. The path ahead was fraught with danger, yet turning back was no longer an option. Not for her, not for Diana, and certainly not for the man before her whose suffering had lasted 20 years too long. "Then we have our course," she said, resolution firming her voice. "When shall we begin?" Twilight descended over Blackwood Castle, painting the stone walls in hues of purple and gray. In Diana's chamber, Alara knelt before her daughter, adjusting the child's cloak with hands that betrayed her anxiety, despite her calm expression. "Remember," she instructed softly, "you must follow Cormac's lead when passing the guards, but once beyond the northern wall, trust your own sight above all else." Diana nodded solemnly, her young face serious beyond her years. "I can see the path, Mother. I've been practicing since you told me." "Practicing?" Alara paused in her adjustments. "Looking for the golden threads," Diana explained, as if it were obvious. "They're everywhere in the castle, but strongest around the king. They point north, toward the forest." Alara exchanged a glance with Cormac, who stood nearby with the nervous excitement of youth embarking on adventure. At 14, the boy was tall for his age, already showing the strong features that would one day mirror his father's. "My father has arranged our passage through the northern gate," Cormac explained, patting the hunting bow slung over his shoulder. "The guards believe we're checking snares I set yesterday. They won't question us if we return before full dark." "And if you don't find the grove within that time?" Alara asked, voicing her greatest fear. "Then we return regardless," Cormac promised. "We can try again tomorrow with a different approach." The reassurance was meant to comfort, but Alara felt the pressure of time bearing down on them all. Magnus's condition was deteriorating rapidly, and Gerard's faction grew bolder by the hour. Every day that passed without progress strengthened their position while weakening the king's. "Trust your instincts," Alara told Diana, pressing a small leather pouch into her hand. "If you find the grove, place 3 drops of this on the central stone. It will signal your presence to those who guard the ancient knowledge." Diana tucked the pouch carefully inside her tunic. "What about you, Mother? Will Lord Gerard hurt you while I'm gone?" The directness of the question caught Alara off guard. She had tried to shield Diana from the political dangers surrounding them, but her perceptive daughter had clearly sensed the tension permeating the castle. "I will be fine," Alara assured her, forcing confidence into her voice. "The king has summoned the full council. Lord Gerard would not dare move against me openly while His Majesty presides." At least she hoped not. The emergency council session Magnus had called was a gambit, forcing Gerard to either abandon his accusations or formalize them before the assembled lords and ladies of Blackwood. Either way, it would buy time for the children's mission. "It's time," Cormac said, glancing at the window where the last rays of direct sunlight were fading. "The changing of the guard happens now, which gives us our best chance." Alara embraced Diana tightly, inhaling the familiar scent of her daughter's hair. "Be careful, my love. Return to me safely, with or without what we seek." "I will," Diana promised. "And Mother, the king's shadows are fighting the light today. You should hurry to him." With that cryptic observation, she took Cormac's offered hand and slipped from the chamber, leaving Alara to contemplate her daughter's words. Diana's second sight often manifested in symbolic perceptions rather than literal visions. If she saw Magnus's shadows fighting the light, his condition might be worsening faster than anticipated. Wasting no time, Alara gathered her healing satchel and made her way toward the great hall where the council awaited. The corridors seemed unusually empty, most servants and courtiers likely congregating near the hall to catch whispers of the dramatic confrontation brewing within. As she approached the massive doors to the great hall, Alaric emerged from a side passage, his expression grim but determined. "Lady Alara," he greeted her with a quick nod. "His Majesty awaits your testimony. Be warned, Gerard has assembled his supporters in force." "And the king's condition?" Alaric's jaw tightened. "Worsening by the hour. He masks it well, but this morning's attack was merely a prelude. Something accelerates the curse's effects." "Or someone," Alara suggested quietly. "Indeed." Alaric glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. "The children departed safely?" "Yes, with luck, they'll return with what we need before full dark." "Good. Magnus can maintain the council session until then, but not much longer without raising suspicions about his health." The beta squared his shoulders. "Ready yourself. Gerard means to discredit you completely." With that warning, Alaric pushed open the great hall doors. The cavernous chamber fell silent as Alara entered, all eyes turning to the village healer who had become the center of court intrigue. The council members sat in their customary semicircle, with Magnus at the center upon a raised dais. Even seated, the king commanded presence, though Alara noted with concern the whiteness of his knuckles as he gripped the throne's armrests. Lord Gerard stood before the assembly, his handsome face composed in an expression of regretful duty. Lady Seraphina sat among the council members, her calculating gaze fixed on Alara with predatory focus. "Lady Alara of Willowbrook," Magnus announced, his voice stronger than his physical state would suggest, "you have been summoned to address concerns raised by Lord Gerard regarding your work with the royal tree." Alara advanced to stand beside Gerard, offering a respectful curtsy to the king, while ignoring her accuser completely. "I am here to serve, Your Majesty," she replied clearly. "Lord Gerard has suggested your methods pose a danger to the kingdom," Magnus continued formally. "He claims you employ blood magic similar to that practiced by the witch Morwen, whose curse afflicts Blackwood to this day." A murmur rippled through the assembled council. blood magic remained a powerful taboo, its mere mention enough to evoke horror 2 decades after Morwen's defeat. "Does Lord Gerard offer evidence for this grave accusation?" Alara asked, her voice steady despite the seriousness of the charge. "I do," Gerard interjected smoothly, producing a small cloth stained with dark brown spots. This was recovered from the royal tree's roots, a cloth soaked in blood used in her so-called healing rituals. He passed the cloth to the nearest council member, an elderly baron who recoiled visibly before passing it to his neighbor. "Furthermore," Gerard continued, "witnesses report Lady Alara chanting in unknown tongues during her sessions with the tree, adding her own blood to mixtures applied to its roots, and engaging in other practices consistent with forbidden magical arts." The council's murmurs grew louder. Alara could feel the mood shifting against her with each calculated word from Gerard's lips. "If I may respond, Your Majesty?" she requested, keeping her gaze fixed on Magnus rather than the increasingly hostile council. At the king's nod, she took a steadying breath. "I have never denied using all available methods to heal the royal tree. The task presented was not an ordinary ailment, but a magical corruption of extraordinary power. To counter such darkness requires extraordinary measures." "So you admit to blood magic?" Gerard pounced, triumph flashing in his eyes. "I admit to using blood as a component in a healing remedy," Alara corrected firmly. "There is a profound difference between blood freely given to nurture life and blood forcibly taken to corrupt it. One is the practice of traditional healers across many lands. The other is the domain of those like Morwen who seek power through suffering." "A convenient distinction," Lady Seraphina observed coldly from her council seat. "Yet blood magic remains blood magic, regardless of intent." "Does it?" Alara challenged, turning to face the assembled council directly for the first time. "When a mother gives blood to save her child, is that the same as a murderer spilling blood for dark power? When a warrior bleeds defending his homeland, is that equivalent to a sacrifice upon a witch's altar?" Her words struck a chord with several council members, whose expressions shifted from suspicion to thoughtfulness. "Intent matters," she continued. "Method matters, but most of all, outcome matters. In the week I worked with the royal tree before Lord Gerard's interference, measurable improvement was documented. Ask Master Elias, who examined the tree daily. Ask the royal gardeners who noted new growth appearing for the first time in years." "Temporary effects achieved through forbidden means," Gerard dismissed. "The tree appeared to improve because dark magic temporarily masked its true condition, just as a fever might seem to break before death claims the patient." The debate continued in this vein, with Gerard painting Alara's methods as dangerous and deceptive, while she defended the legitimacy of her traditional healing practices. Throughout the exchange, Alara noted Magnus's condition visibly deteriorating despite his efforts to conceal it. Sweat beaded on his brow, and the lines around his mouth deepened with suppressed pain. Finally, as Gerard launched into an impassioned warning about the dangers of allowing hedge witchery into the heart of Blackwood's governance, Magnus raised a hand for silence. "Enough," he commanded, though the word cost him visible effort. "The council has heard arguments from both sides. Before rendering judgment, I would speak privately with Lady Alara to assess her methods firsthand." Gerard's smooth facade cracked momentarily. "Your Majesty, given the potential dangers, are you suggesting the king cannot protect himself from a single healer, Lord Gerard?" Alaric interrupted from his position behind the throne. "Or perhaps you question His Majesty's judgment in this matter." The trap was neatly laid. To object further would imply either the king's weakness or incompetence, both dangerous accusations for a subject to make, even one as powerful as Gerard. "Of course not," Gerard recovered smoothly. "I merely suggest that additional council members be present for such a consultation." "Your concern is noted," Magnus replied, his tone making it clear the matter was settled. "Lady Alara will accompany me to the East Tower study. The council will reconvene at the evening bell to hear my decision." With effort that only Alara and perhaps Alaric could fully perceive, Magnus rose from the throne and exited through a side door reserved for royal use. Alara followed, feeling the burning gazes of Gerard and Seraphina on her back as she departed. The journey to the East Tower seemed to take an eternity, with Magnus leaning heavily on Alaric's arm, his breathing labored. By the time they reached the private study, the king was alarmingly pale, dark shadows circling his amber eyes. "You must rest, Magnus," Alaric urged as he helped his king to a chair near the fireplace. "No time," Magnus managed, waving off further concern. "The curse accelerates. Gerard has found a way to amplify its effects." Alara moved swiftly to the king's side, her healer's instincts taking precedence over protocol. Pressing her palm to his forehead, she gasped at the unnatural heat radiating from his skin. "This is more than the curse's natural progression," she confirmed, quickly opening her satchel to retrieve emergency remedies. "Something external aggravates it, something recent." "The royal tree," Magnus guessed through clenched teeth. "Gerard's people may have contaminated it after suspending your treatments." Alaric nodded grimly. "I'll send trusted guards to secure the glass garden immediately." "Too late," Magnus groaned, as a fresh wave of pain visibly coursed through him. "Whatever they've done is already working. The connection between me and the tree, it burns like acid in my veins." Alara worked quickly, mixing a powerful pain-relieving tincture with trembling hands. "Drink this," she instructed, holding the cup to the king's lips. "It won't address the curse directly, but it may dull its effects temporarily." Magnus complied, grimacing at the bitter taste. "How much time do you need?" The question wasn't about the medicine, but about their larger plan. How long he needed to maintain his position while the children searched for the grove. "Until nightfall at minimum," Alara replied honestly. "Diana and Cormac may need several hours to locate the grove and retrieve the information we need." "I can give you that much," Magnus promised, though the cost was written clearly on his face. "Alaric, what news from the northern wall?" "The children passed through without incident," the beta reported. "The guards believe they're checking hunting snares. No one connected to Gerard appeared to notice their departure." A measure of relief passed over Magnus's features. "Good. Now we need only maintain this charade until their return." His amber gaze fixed on Alara with burning intensity. "The council reconvenes at the evening bell. By then, I must either publicly support your methods or condemn them. Gerard has forced my hand." "Let me examine you properly," Alara requested, concern overriding political considerations. "Something about this acceleration feels deliberate, targeted." With Alaric standing guard at the door, Alara conducted a thorough assessment of the king's condition. The curse's manifestation had indeed changed. What had once been a slow, steady corruption now raged like wildfire through his system. New silver strands appeared in his hair even as she watched, the aging process visible to the naked eye. "There," Magnus said suddenly, pointing to a small wooden box on a side table. "That arrived this morning. Allegedly an offering from a loyal northern village." Alara approached the box cautiously. It appeared ordinary enough, polished wood with simple brass hinges. Opening it revealed a handful of dried black petals nestled on velvet. "Death blossoms," she identified immediately, her blood running cold. "Extremely rare. They grow only where violent death has occurred repeatedly in the same location." "A battlefield plant," Alaric noted from the doorway, "or a sacrifice site. More significantly, they can be used to amplify existing curses," Alara explained, closing the box carefully. "Particularly those connected to death or decay. The petals absorb negative energies from their growing sites and can release them when properly prepared." "Gerard," Magnus concluded grimly, "or someone working on his behalf. The timing is too perfect to be coincidence." "The box itself may be enchanted as well," Alara suggested, returning to the king's side with fresh concern. "Simply being near these blossoms could accelerate the curse's effects on you." "Remove them," Magnus ordered Alaric. "Have them burned immediately, away from the castle grounds." As Alaric departed with the dangerous box, Alara turned her full attention back to Magnus. The brief respite provided by her tincture was already fading, pain etching deeper lines into his face with each passing minute. "We cannot wait for the children's return," she said decisively. "The curse's acceleration has changed our timeline. We must attempt something now to slow its progress." "What do you propose?" Magnus asked, his voice rough with suppressed agony. Alara hesitated, weighing risks against necessity. "A temporary binding," she said finally. "Not the complete joining described in the ancient texts, but a preliminary connection that might allow me to siphon some of the curse's effects from you to myself." Magnus's eyes widened. "That would place you in considerable danger." "Less than you might think," she countered. "As an Omega with healing gifts, I'm naturally resistant to corrupting influences. I can likely process and neutralize the energies that are overwhelming your system." "And if you cannot?" Alara met his gaze directly. "Then we both suffer until Diana returns with the knowledge we need. But you gain precious hours of clarity and strength, hours you currently don't have." The king studied her face intently, as if searching for hesitation or deception. Finding neither, he nodded slowly. "What does this temporary binding require?" "Blood, freely given by both participants," she explained, removing a small silver knife from her satchel. "And physical contact during the transference." "More blood magic," Magnus noted, with a hint of grim humor. "Gerard would be delighted with the confirmation." The original magic that connected the monarch to Blackwood itself was blood magic of the purest kind, Alara reminded him. "All healing ultimately depends on life force, and blood is merely its physical manifestation." Without further discussion, she sterilized the knife in the study's fireplace flame, then carefully cut a small line across her palm. The blood welled instantly, bright red against her skin. Turning to Magnus, she repeated the process on his outstretched hand. "Repeat after me," she instructed, pressing their bleeding palms together. "By blood freely given, I forge a bridge between us." Magnus repeated the words, his deep voice steadying as the ritual gave him momentary focus against the pain. "What is yours becomes partly mine," Alara continued, feeling the first tingles of magical connection forming between them. "Burden shared until shadow passes." As Magnus echoed her words, a visible current seemed to pass between their joined hands, not light exactly, but a shifting of energies that both could perceive. Alara gasped as the first tendrils of the curse's darkness entered her system, cold and hungry and viciously alien. Magnus's reaction was the opposite. His rigid posture relaxed fractionally, the lines of pain around his eyes softening as the burden he had carried alone for 20 years was partially lifted. "It's working," he murmured, wonder in his voice. Alara nodded, unable to speak, as she fought to contain and process the corrupting energy now flowing into her. It was unlike anything she had encountered before, not simply darkness or decay, but a malevolent intelligence that sought to consume everything it touched. Now that intelligence recognized a new host, turning its hungry attention partially toward her. For several minutes, they remained locked in silent struggle, Magnus gradually regaining strength as Alara absorbed more of the curse's effects. The pain was considerable, but manageable, her healing abilities neutralizing the corruption almost as quickly as it entered her system. Finally, when color had returned to Magnus's face and clarity to his eyes, Alara gently separated their hands. The connection remained, invisible but tangible between them, a magical tether that continued to balance the curse's effects across both bodies. "How do you feel?" she asked, her voice slightly strained from the effort of containment. "Clearer than I have in months," Magnus admitted, examining his hand where the cut was already healing. "The pain hasn't vanished, but it's dulled, distant." "Good. The binding appears successful." Alara swayed slightly as she rose from her knees, the room spinning momentarily around her. Magnus caught her elbow, steadying her with surprising strength. "And you? The cost seems high." "Manageable," she assured him, though in truth the curse's presence was more challenging than she had anticipated. Not merely pain, but a constant pressure against her will, searching for weaknesses to exploit. "I can maintain this connection until nightfall, perhaps longer if needed." The king's amber eyes studied her with concern, and something deeper, a recognition of the sacrifice she had made willingly for a man who, just weeks ago, had been a stranger. "Why?" he asked simply. Alara understood the unspoken question. "Because suffering should be opposed whenever possible," she answered. "Because 20 years is too long for any soul to carry such darkness alone." Because your kingdom needs you whole and strong against those who would exploit its weakness. She didn't add the final reason that had crystallized only as their blood mingled. Because something in Magnus Blackthorn called to something in her, a recognition that transcended their brief acquaintance. A discreet knock at the door preceded Alaric's return. The beta's eyes widened slightly as he took in the scene. Magnus standing straight and strong, Alara noticeably paler, but composed. "The box has been destroyed," he reported, "and I bring news. Riders approach from the north. Lord Gerard's men, returning from patrol earlier than expected." Magnus and Alara exchanged alarmed glances. "The children," she whispered. "How many riders?" Magnus demanded. "A full squadron," Alaric replied grimly. 20 at least, riding hard for the northern gate. "They know," Magnus realized. "Somehow, they've discovered what we seek. Alaric, take our fastest riders and intercept Gerard's men. The children must be protected at all costs." As Alaric hurried to obey, Alara felt cold fear grip her heart. Diana was beyond the castle walls, with only Cormac for protection. If Gerard's men found them searching for the sacred grove, "I should go with them," she said urgently. "Diana will sense danger, but she may hide so effectively that even Alaric's men cannot find her." "Too dangerous," Magnus countered. "Gerard would expect exactly that reaction. He may have forces waiting to intercept you specifically." He placed a hand on her shoulder, the touch conveying reassurance. "Trust Alaric. He's a father himself and knows these lands better than anyone save me." Alara wanted to argue, but recognized the strategic wisdom in his words. Still, every maternal instinct screamed against remaining safely inside while her daughter faced unknown dangers. "The council reconvenes soon," Magnus reminded her, his voice gentle but firm. "We must present a united front if we're to counter Gerard's accusations effectively. This temporary binding gives us that opportunity. I can demonstrate clearly that your methods bring healing, not harm." "And if the children do not return in time?" Alara asked, voicing her deepest fear. "Then we improvise," Magnus replied grimly. "I am still king, and you now carry part of the curse that afflicts me. Together, we present a more formidable opposition than Gerard anticipates." The evening bell tolled before Alara could respond, its resonant sound marking the hour of their confrontation with the council. Without further words, they made their way back toward the great hall, each drawing strength from the magical connection that now bound them together. The council members had reassembled in their places, their expressions ranging from open curiosity to barely concealed hostility. Gerard stood before them, impeccably composed as always, though a flicker of surprise crossed his features when Magnus entered without assistance, his bearing regal and commanding despite the silver in his hair. "The council reconvenes," Magnus announced, taking his place on the central throne with fluid grace that belied his earlier weakness. "Lord Gerard has raised serious concerns regarding Lady Alara's methods in treating the royal tree. I have investigated these claims personally." Alara stood beside the throne, acutely aware of the calculating gazes assessing both her and the king. The partial binding had affected her appearance as well. Subtle silver streaks now highlighted her brown hair, and fine lines had appeared at the corners of her eyes where none had existed that morning. "Before rendering judgment," Magnus continued, "I have additional questions for Lord Gerard." Gerard inclined his head respectfully, though wariness entered his expression. "Of course, Your Majesty. You claim Lady Alara's blood magic poses a danger to the kingdom," Magnus stated, yet the royal tree showed measurable improvement during her week of treatment. "How do you explain this contradiction?" "Appearances can be deceptive, Your Majesty," Gerard replied smoothly. "Dark magic often creates an illusion of improvement before its true damage manifests." "Indeed," Magnus agreed. "Deception is a powerful tool. Speaking of which, can you explain why a box of death blossoms was delivered to my chambers this morning, disguised as a tribute from the northern villages?" A ripple of shocked murmurs ran through the council. Death blossoms were known to all as instruments of dark magic. For the first time, Gerard appeared genuinely surprised. "I know nothing of such a delivery, Your Majesty, though it certainly raises concerns about security within the castle, perhaps even suggesting Lady Alara's involvement." An interesting theory, Magnus replied, his voice dangerously soft, except that Lady Alara identified the blossoms immediately and warned of their purpose, to amplify the curse affecting me and, by extension, all of Blackwood. Why would she do so if she had sent them herself? Gerard recovered quickly. To establish trust, perhaps. The workings of those who practice dark arts are often circuitous. Or perhaps, Magnus suggested, rising from the throne to address the council directly, the blossoms were sent by someone who benefits from the curse's acceleration, someone who has consistently positioned himself as the alternative to a king weakened by Morwen's magic. The accusation hung in the air, unspoken but unmistakable. Gerard's handsome face hardened, his courtier's mask slipping to reveal the calculating ambition beneath. "Your Majesty suggests I would harm you deliberately?" he asked, his voice tight with controlled anger. "After 2 decades of loyal service to Blackwood?" "I suggest nothing," Magnus replied. "I merely note that your territory alone remains unaffected by the blight spreading through my kingdom. I note that your accusations against Lady Alara began precisely when her treatments showed promise, and I note that your loyal service has consistently undermined royal authority while positioning you as my natural successor." The council chamber had gone deathly silent, the assembled lords and ladies watching the confrontation with rapt attention. Lady Seraphina had risen slightly in her seat, her hand moving subtly toward what might have been a concealed weapon. "These are serious allegations, Your Majesty," Gerard said carefully, "made more concerning by your evident connection with the Omega Healer." His gaze flickered meaningfully to Alara's newly silver-streaked hair, then back to Magnus. "Perhaps the curse affects your judgment more deeply than previously understood." Before Magnus could respond, the great hall doors burst open. A royal guard entered, his expression urgent. "Your Majesty," he announced, bowing hastily, "riders approach from the north. Lord Alaric returns with the children." Alara's heart leapt at the news, her eyes seeking Magnus's in shared relief. If Diana and Cormac had returned safely, perhaps they had found what they sought in the sacred grove. "This council session will pause briefly," Magnus declared, his tone brooking no argument. "Lord Gerard will remain here under guard until my return. Lady Alara will accompany me to receive Lord Alaric's report." As they moved toward the doors, Gerard called after them, his voice carrying an edge of desperation beneath its controlled exterior. "The council has not yet ruled on the accusations before it, Your Majesty. Procedure demands—" "Procedure serves the crown, not the reverse." Magnus cut him off without turning. "We will reconvene shortly." In the castle's main courtyard, torches illuminated a scene of controlled chaos. Alaric dismounted from his lathered horse, helping Diana down with careful hands. The girl appeared unharmed but exhausted, her young face drawn with fatigue. Beside them, Cormac sat astride his own mount, an angry red scratch marking one cheek, but otherwise intact. "Diana!" Alara rushed forward, gathering her daughter into a fierce embrace. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine, Mother," Diana assured her, though her small body trembled slightly with reaction. "But Lord Alaric fought the bad men who followed us." Alara looked questioningly at Alaric, who nodded grimly. "Gerard's men intercepted us near the northern forest edge. They claimed to be patrolling for poachers, but their actions suggested otherwise. When they attempted to separate the children from our group, conflict became unavoidable." "Casualties?" Magnus asked quietly. "None fatal," Alaric replied, "though several injuries on both sides. I left men to bring the wounded back more slowly." Diana tugged at Alara's sleeve, her expression urgent despite her exhaustion. "Mother, we found it. The hidden path, just like in your stories, and the standing stones, and the old book buried beneath the tallest one." Hope flared in Alara's chest. "You found the grove? And the ritual text?" The girl nodded, reaching into her tunic to withdraw a small leather-bound volume, its cover worn smooth by centuries of handling. "The Guardian said it belongs to the true king and his chosen mate. No one else can read it." Alara accepted the book with reverent hands, feeling ancient magic pulse from its pages. "Guardian?" she asked, exchanging a startled glance with Magnus. "A white wolf," Cormac explained, joining them. Larger than any I've ever seen. It appeared when Diana placed the drops on the center stone, just as you instructed. It spoke to us, though not in words exactly. The forest guardian, Magnus murmured, recognition in his voice. A spirit bound to Blackwood since its founding. I've glimpsed it only once before, on the night of my coronation. He reached for the book, his fingers brushing Alara's as they both held the ancient text. As their skin made contact, the volume seemed to warm, the faded symbols on its cover briefly glowing with inner light before subsiding. The joining of opposites, Alara whispered, the phrase from Elias's research suddenly vivid with new meaning. Indeed, Magnus agreed, his amber eyes meeting hers with understanding. It seems we have what we need to break Morwen's curse at last. Or to strengthen it beyond all hope of remedy, came Gerard's voice from the courtyard entrance. They turned to find him standing with Lady Seraphina and a contingent of guards wearing his personal colors. How he had evaded the royal guards in the Great Hall was a question for later. His presence now represented an immediate threat. This has gone far enough, Gerard announced, his handsome face set in lines of righteous concern. The king is clearly under magical influence, attempting to enact foreign rituals with an unproven Omega, whose methods resemble those of the witch Morwen herself. He gestured toward Diana and the book she had retrieved. Now they involve children in their forbidden practices, risking not only the throne, but the very soul of Blackwood itself. A murmur rose from the gathering crowd of castle residents drawn by the commotion. Gerard was playing to this audience skillfully, positioning himself as the realm's protector against dark magic, rather than as an ambitious usurper. In the absence of clear judgment from our obviously compromised monarch, Gerard continued, I, as highest-ranking Alpha Lord of Blackwood, temporarily assume authority to prevent further corruption of the royal bloodline. Treason! Alaric growled, stepping forward with hand on sword hilt. Preservation, Gerard countered smoothly. The council will determine final authority once the magical influence has been removed from our king. As he spoke, Seraphina moved subtly to one side, her hands weaving a pattern in the air that raised the hairs on Alara's neck with its malevolent purpose. The noblewoman was attempting some form of magic, exactly the crime they had accused Alara of committing. Diana, behind me, Alara commanded sharply, pulling her daughter into the protective circle of her arm while her free hand reached for the small knife concealed in her sleeve. Before either side could act further, a tremendous cracking sound split the night air. All eyes turned toward the eastern section of the castle where the glass garden stood. Even from the courtyard, they could see an unearthly glow emanating from the garden dome, pulsing with sickly green light. The royal tree, Magnus realized, his face paling. Gerard's people have done something to it while we were distracted with council politics. As if in confirmation of his words, pain lanced through both Magnus and Alara simultaneously, the curse surging through their partially shared connection with renewed viciousness. Magnus staggered, catching himself on Alaric's supportive arm, while Alara fought to remain standing despite the sudden assault on her senses. You see, Gerard called to the watching crowd, the curse strengthens its hold. We must act now before all is lost. The situation balanced on a knife's edge, Gerard's forces moving to seize control, while Magnus's loyal guards formed a protective ring around their king. Violence seemed inevitable as tensions reached breaking point. Then Diana's clear voice cut through the growing chaos. The tree is dying. All eyes turned to the small girl, who stood now with one hand extended toward the distant garden, her expression distant with second sight. They poisoned its roots with death magic, she continued, her voice taking on an otherworldly quality that sent chills through the assembled crowd. The tree dies, and with it, the king. With it, Blackwood itself. As if to punctuate her words, a tremor ran through the castle grounds, stones shifting beneath their feet as the earth itself responded to the royal tree's distress. In that moment of universal alarm, the political machinations temporarily halted as a more primal fear took hold, the fear of witnessing the death of something ancient and foundational to the kingdom's existence. Magnus straightened, shaking off Alaric's support despite the obvious pain racking his body. "The ritual," he said to Alara, his voice low but urgent. "We cannot wait any longer. The tree's death would make the curse permanent, beyond all hope of remedy." Alara glanced at the ancient book in her hands, then at Gerard's forces still blocking their path to the great hall where such a ritual would normally be performed. "The garden itself," she suggested, inspiration striking. "The royal tree is the heart of the connection. We must perform the ritual where the corruption is strongest." Magnus nodded, understanding immediately. "Alaric, clear a path to the eastern gate. Lady Alara and I must reach the glass garden without delay." As the beta moved to obey, Gerard's voice rose again in protest. "Stop them! They seek to complete the dark ritual that will doom us all." But the tremors had grown stronger, and with them, a primal fear that overrode even Gerard's persuasive rhetoric. The assembled crowd parted instinctively before their king and the healer who now visibly shared his burden, the silver streaks in her hair gleaming in the torchlight. "Mother?" Diana's voice was small, suddenly that of a child again rather than a seer. Alara knelt swiftly before her daughter, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Stay with Cormac and Lord Alaric. Whatever happens in the garden, do not follow us unless we call for you. Promise me." Diana nodded solemnly, tears welling in her eyes, though she fought bravely to contain them. "The White Wolf said the price would be high," she whispered, "but that true healing always is." The cryptic message sent a chill through Alara's heart, but there was no time to question it further. The royal tree's distress manifested in increasingly violent tremors, and Magnus's condition deteriorated visibly with each passing moment. "We must go," she said, rising to take the king's arm in support. "Now, while we still can." Together they moved toward the eastern gate, the ancient book clutched firmly between them, while behind them Gerard's protests faded against the greater fear now gripping Blackwood Castle. The confrontation had reached its turning point. The next hours would determine not only their personal fates, but the future of an entire kingdom hanging in the balance. The glass garden loomed before them, its damaged dome glowing with sickly green light that pulsed like a diseased heartbeat. As Magnus and Alara approached, the earth trembled beneath their feet, the castle stones groaning in sympathy with the royal tree's distress. Guards stationed at the garden entrance fled at their approach. Whether from fear of the supernatural phenomena or loyalty to Gerard, Alara couldn't determine. All that mattered was the clear path to the ancient oak that stood dying at the garden's center. The scene inside stole her breath. The royal tree, once majestic despite its affliction, now writhed as though in agony, its bark splitting to reveal glowing green veins of corruption pulsing beneath. The soil around its roots bubbled with dark ichor, and the air itself tasted of rot and despair. "Morwen's final vengeance," Magnus murmured, his voice tight with pain as the shared curse hammered at both their bodies. "Gerard's people must have introduced something new, a catalyst designed to push the corruption past the point of no return." Alara moved closer to the suffering tree, her healer's instincts momentarily overwhelming caution. The magical poison was unlike anything she had encountered, not simply corruption, but active malevolence, as if Morwen's hatred had been distilled and concentrated over 20 years, waiting for this moment. "We have little time," she said, turning back to Magnus. Her breath caught at the sight of him. In the few minutes since entering the garden, his appearance had aged visibly. Deep lines carved his face, and his silver hair had turned almost completely white. "The tree cannot last much longer, and neither can you." Magnus nodded grimly, extending his hand for the ancient book Diana had retrieved from the sacred grove. As their fingers touched, the leather-bound volume warmed, and its cover symbols glowed briefly before revealing themselves as readable text. "The Covenant of Realms," Alara translated, the archaic language somehow comprehensible to her touch. "Written in the blood of the first king and sealed with the essence of the forest guardian." Together they opened the book, its yellowed pages covered in script that shifted and rearranged itself beneath their gaze, transforming from indecipherable runes into words they could understand. Both recognized the magic at work, the text revealing itself only to those it deemed worthy, the true king and his chosen counterpart. "Here," Magnus said, his finger tracing a passage near the center. "The ritual of restoration, to heal what darkness has corrupted, to bind what treachery has sundered." Alara read the ritual requirements with growing concern. The joining described was no symbolic ceremony, but a profound merging of life forces, alpha and omega, shadow and light, death and life, combined through blood, body, and spirit to create a balance powerful enough to neutralize even the most malignant curse. "Magnus," she said softly, using his name rather than title for the first time. "You understand what this requires? A true mating bond, irreversible and complete. Our lives would be permanently intertwined, our fates shared until death." The king met her gaze steadily, his amber eyes bright with pain, but clear with purpose. "I understand. The question is whether you are willing to make such a sacrifice, to bind yourself forever to a man you've known mere weeks, to shoulder the burden of a kingdom not your own." Another tremor shook the garden, stronger than before. Glass panels crashed from the dome, shattering around them as the royal tree's distress intensified. They had minutes, perhaps less, before the death of the tree made the curse permanent. "It's not merely sacrifice," Alara replied, her voice strengthening with certainty. "In these weeks, I've seen a king worth serving, a man worth healing. My life has been devoted to mending what is broken. What greater purpose could there be than healing both monarch and realm?" Something shifted in Magnus's expression, the weight of 20 years of isolation and suffering briefly lifting to reveal the man beneath the burden. Without words, he extended his hand. When Alara took it, the connection between them, already established through their temporary binding, flared with new potential. "Then let us begin," he said, "while strength remains." The ritual described in the ancient text required specific preparations. Working swiftly, they cleared a space directly beside the suffering tree, removing debris and smoothing the disturbed earth. Magnus used his dagger to cut branches from the royal tree, the wood protesting with groans that sounded almost human, while Alara drew symbols in the soil using chalk mixed with her own blood. As they worked, the garden doors burst open. Alaric entered with sword drawn, followed by a contingent of royal guards. "Gerard approaches with armed men," the beta reported tersely. "The council is divided. Some support him, others remain loyal to the crown. We cannot hold them back for long." Magnus nodded without pausing in his preparations. "Buy us what time you can, old friend. If the ritual succeeds, Gerard's support will crumble when the curse is broken. If it fails—" He left the alternative unspoken. Alaric gripped his king's shoulder briefly. "It has been my honor to serve you, Magnus Blackthorn, in this life and beyond." The farewell quality of his words sent a chill through Alara, but there was no time for sentiment. The royal tree's condition deteriorated by the minute, and with it, Magnus's strength. "Guard the entrance," Magnus commanded. "Let none pass until the ritual is complete, regardless of outcome." As Alaric withdrew with his men, Alara completed the circle of symbols around the cleared space. The ancient text had specified 7 runes representing the fundamental forces of nature: earth, air, fire, water, life, death, and spirit, arranged in a pattern that mirrored the stars on the night Blackwood Kingdom was founded. "It's ready," she told Magnus, who had arranged the tree branches in a specific formation at the circle's center, a crude altar that echoed the shape of the royal tree itself. Together they stepped into the circle, the chalk lines beginning to glow faintly as they crossed the boundary. The ritual required 3 elements for completion: blood freely given, bodies willingly joined, and spirits mutually surrendered. "Begin with blood," Magnus read from the ancient text, "for in blood flows life and death together." They had prepared a single silver bowl, an heirloom of the Blackthorn line that Magnus had retrieved from a hidden alcove in the garden wall. Now he held out his arm over it, drawing his dagger across his wrist with unflinching precision. Dark blood, tainted with green streaks from the curse, flowed into the bowl. Alara followed suit, her healer's hand steady as she opened her own vein. Her blood ran clear and bright, a vivid contrast to Magnus's corrupted essence. As their blood mingled in the bowl, a reaction occurred. Steam rising, the liquids swirling together of their own accord, red and green merging into something new. Magnus lifted the bowl with both hands, offering it first to Alara. "Drink of my essence," he intoned, following the ritual text, "that my strength may become yours." Alara accepted the bowl, the metallic scent of blood mixed with something acrid from the curse. Steeling herself, she drank a small sip before passing it back to Magnus. "Drink of my essence," she repeated, "that my healing may become yours." Magnus drained the remaining mixture, his expression unchanging despite the undoubtedly bitter taste. The moment he finished, the bowl shattered in his hands, fragments turning to dust that scattered across the circle. The first phase completed, they moved to the second, physical union representing the joining of opposites. Under normal circumstances, such intimacy would require privacy and time. The ritual, however, demanded only symbolic consummation to forge the necessary connection. Magnus drew Alara close, one hand cradling her face with unexpected gentleness, despite the urgency of their situation. "In another life," he murmured, "this joining would be worthy of you, not born of necessity, but of choice, freely made." "It is freely made," Alara assured him, her hand covering his. Necessity merely hastened what fate had already written. Their lips met as another tremor shook the garden, this one violent enough to crack the stone floor beneath the circle. The kiss deepened, and with it, the magical connection between them strengthened. No longer a temporary binding, but something more profound and permanent. Alara felt the moment the mating bond began to form, a sensation like a key turning in a lock that had waited a lifetime to be opened. Ancient instincts awakened in both Alpha and Omega, older than civilization, deeper than conscious thought. Magnus's scent changed subtly, becoming uniquely attuned to her, while her own body responded with recognition of its perfect counterpart. When they separated, breathless, the air around them had changed, charged with potential, with the magic of creation itself responding to the rare and powerful union of true mates. "The final phase," Magnus said, his voice rough with emotion and pain, "the surrender of spirit, of..." This was the most dangerous aspect of the ritual, and the most mysterious. The ancient text spoke of a spiritual merging that would allow the healing energy of the Omega to directly confront the corrupting force within the Alpha. Neither could predict what form this confrontation would take or what risks it might entail. They knelt facing each other within the circle, their joined hands resting on the crude altar of tree branches. The symbols around them now glowed with steady light, illuminating their faces in the darkened garden. "With this breath, I surrender my spirit to our bond," Magnus began, speaking the ritual words with quiet dignity. "What was mine alone becomes ours together, in shadow and light, in strength and weakness, in life and in death." "With this breath, I surrender my spirit to our bond," Alara echoed. "What was mine alone becomes ours together, in shadow and light, in strength and weakness, in life and in death." As the final word left her lips, the world around them disappeared. The glass garden, the royal tree, the approaching threat of Gerard's forces, all faded into nothingness as their consciousness merged and plunged into a shared mindscape created by the ritual's ancient magic. Alara found herself standing in a vast darkness, not empty, but dense with malevolent presence. Beside her stood Magnus, no longer aged by the curse, but restored to his true prime, a powerful alpha in his 50s, strong and vital. Before them loomed the curse itself, given form within their shared consciousness. Morwen's hatred had taken shape as a monstrous shadow wolf, its eyes burning with sickly green fire, its form composed of writhing darkness that constantly consumed and regenerated itself. For 20 years, this entity had fed on Magnus's life force, using the connection between king and realm to spread its corruption throughout Blackwood. "So we meet at last," Magnus addressed the shadow beast, his voice steady despite the menace radiating from the creature. 20 years you have fed on my essence, used my strength against my people, twisted the sacred bond between monarch and realm. The shadow wolf snarled, revealing teeth formed from concentrated malice. When it spoke, its voice was a discordant blend of Morwen's hatred and something older, darker, a primordial force of destruction that the witch had merely channeled rather than created. The bond was flawed from inception, it hissed. Kings who claim divine right while forgetting their mortal nature. Your line took without giving, commanded without serving. I am merely the balance you denied. The darkness you pretended did not exist within your precious covenant. Alara felt the terrible truth in the creature's words. Not complete truth, but enough to give the curse power beyond mere malevolence. Morwen had exploited a real imbalance in the original covenant, a flaw in the relationship between rulers and realm that had persisted for generations. There is wisdom even in your corruption, Alara acknowledged, stepping forward despite Magnus's protective gesture. The bond between ruler and realm must be one of mutual sustenance, not merely power flowing in one direction. The shadow wolf's attention shifted to her, its green eyes narrowing with calculation. The healer speaks truth. Why then does she bind herself to perpetuate the flawed covenant? Your gift belongs to the earth, not to kingdoms of men. My gift belongs where I choose to bestow it, Alara countered firmly. And I choose to heal not just the king, but the covenant itself, to restore balance where imbalance has festered. The creature laughed, a sound like bones breaking. You cannot heal what was corrupt from its foundation. The first king took power through bloodshed, claimed divine right through deception. I am merely the truth of that original sin made manifest. Magnus stepped forward to stand beside Alara. Then let us reforge it entirely, he proposed. Not restoration, but recreation. A new covenant built on truth rather than legend, on mutual service rather than dominion. The shadow wolf hesitated, seemingly confused by this unexpected proposal. In that moment of uncertainty, Alara saw their opportunity. Within this magical mindscape, intention shaped reality. If they could envision a new covenant powerful enough to replace the corrupted original, they might not need to destroy the curse, but rather transform it. Join with me, she murmured to Magnus, their fingers intertwining. Show me the Blackwood that lives in your heart, the kingdom as it should be. As their minds merged more deeply, shared vision took form around them. Blackwood reborn, its fields fertile, its forests vibrant, its people prosperous. But unlike the kingdom's mythic origins, this vision acknowledged the shadow with the light, the responsibility with the power, the service with the authority. Magnus imagined himself not as ruler over, but as caretaker of the land and its people, bound by duty rather than divine right. The shadow wolf watched their creation with wary fascination, the green fire in its eyes flickering as something shifted within its nature. The creature was, after all, an embodiment of balance, albeit a destructive one. Presented with a more perfect balance, it found its purpose challenged. What you propose would change the nature of kingship itself, it growled, circling their joined forms cautiously. Power freely limited, authority bound by covenant not just with land, but with people. The arrogance of the first kings replaced by humility of service. Not replaced, Magnus corrected, evolved. What began in blood and conquest can mature into protection and nurture. The shadow wolf need not devour to balance. It can guard instead. The creature paused, considering. In this moment of possibility, Alara made her move. Stepping forward, she extended her hand toward the shadow wolf's muzzle, not in challenge but in offering. I bring life where you bring death, she said simply. Not to destroy you, but to complete you. The covenant needs both, the strength to protect and the wisdom to nurture, the power to command and the compassion to serve. For a long moment, the shadow wolf remained motionless, its form still writhing with malevolent energy. Then, with deliberate slowness, it extended its muzzle toward Alara's outstretched hand. The moment contact occurred, Transformation began. Light flowed from Alara into the creature of darkness, not obliterating, but interpenetrating, creating something new from the merger of opposites. The shadow wolf's form shimmered, the chaotic writhing of its substance gradually settling into something more defined. What happened next was not instantaneous, but a gradual, profound metamorphosis. The corruption that had been feeding on itself for 20 years began to unravel and reconstruct simultaneously. The sickly green fire in the wolf's eyes flickered, fighting against the change, then surrendered in waves of emerald that melted into amber gold. "You offer not destruction, but completion," the wolf's voice rumbled, no longer discordant, but resonant with new depth. "No one has attempted this before. All have sought to banish darkness rather than embrace it as necessary counterpart to light." Its form continued to evolve, darkness solidifying into midnight fur so deep it seemed to absorb light, yet shot through with threads of silver that caught and reflected illumination. The creature's savage maw, once jagged with hatred, reformed into powerful jaws that spoke of protection rather than consumption. "The transformation requires equal sacrifice from both sides," the wolf continued, its body still rippling with the ongoing metamorphosis. "The darkness must surrender its hunger. The light must acknowledge its limitations. Neither can exist without the other." Magnus stepped forward to join Alara, placing his hand alongside hers on the creature's transforming form. "I have fought against the darkness for 20 years, he acknowledged. "Yet in doing so, perhaps I denied a truth, that shadow is not inherently evil, merely as necessary as light for true balance." A tremor ran through the shadow wolf's form, more of the chaotic energy settling into coherent structure. "And what of the healer?" it asked, turning its increasingly golden gaze to Alara. "Do you truly understand what you embrace? The darkness offers protection, but demands recognition of death as counterpart to your healing. Can you accept that balance?" "I have always understood it," Alara replied softly. "Life and death are not enemies, but phases of the same cycle. My healing has never denied the reality of ending, merely served the flourishing that makes existence worthwhile." With these words, the final resistance within the shadow wolf surrendered, its transformation completed with a pulse of energy that rippled outward through the shared mindscape. Where once stood a monstrous embodiment of corruption, now stood a magnificent creature of power and purpose, a guardian wolf of midnight fur threaded with silver, eyes of amber gold reflecting both strength and wisdom. "The curse transforms," Magnus breathed, watching in wonder as the creature of pure malice evolved before their eyes. "Not broken, but remade." The wolf, no longer shadow but substance, regarded them with new awareness. When it spoke again, its voice had changed, the hateful dissonance replaced by resonant power. "What is freely given cannot be taken," it intoned. "What is willingly transformed cannot be corrupted. The new covenant is accepted, though its price remains to be paid." "What price?" Alara asked, suddenly alert to the warning in the creature's words. "Balance demands sacrifice," the wolf replied. "What was stolen must be restored. 20 years of life taken from the king, 20 years of vitality drained from the kingdom. That debt remains outstanding." Understanding dawned cold and clear in Alara's mind. The curse's effects could not simply vanish. The damage done to both Magnus and Blackwood required repayment. Something must be given to restore what had been taken. "Take from me," she offered without hesitation, "my life force freely given to repay what was stolen." "No," Magnus protested, gripping her shoulders. "The debt is mine alone. I will bear whatever cost remains." The wolf watched their exchange with ancient patience. "Neither alone can pay without destruction," it observed. "Together, the burden may be shared without death, though not without cost." Alara understood first. "Our bond allows the payment to be distributed between us," she realized. "What would kill one can be survived by two." "And by the land itself, which is now part of your joining," the wolf confirmed. "The new covenant creates new possibilities for balance." Magnus nodded slowly, acceptance replacing protest. "Then we share the burden, as we will share all else from this day forward." The wolf approached, its form now solid and real, the embodiment of their transformed covenant. "Kneel," it commanded. Together, Magnus and Alara knelt in the darkness that was slowly filling with light. The wolf circled them once, twice, 3 times, each circuit binding them more completely to each other and to the land itself. "By fang and claw, by root and branch, by crown and heart, the covenant is sealed," it proclaimed. "What remains corrupted shall heal. What was stolen shall be repaid. What was broken shall be remade." With those words, it lunged forward, not in attack, but in merger, its transformed essence flowing into them both simultaneously. Alara gasped as ancient power filled her, wild and primal, but no longer malevolent. Beside her, Magnus shuddered as the curse that had defined his existence for 20 years transformed into something entirely new. The shared mindscape dissolved around them, reality rushing back with disorienting speed. They found themselves still kneeling in the ritual circle within the glass garden, hands clasped over the altar of branches. But everything had changed. The royal tree stood transformed, its bark whole and healthy, its branches reaching skyward with renewed vigor. Where corrupt green light had pulsed, golden radiance now flowed through its trunk and limbs, spreading outward through roots that visibly extended beyond the garden walls. More shocking was the change in themselves. Magnus still bore silver in his hair, lines of experience on his face, but the unnatural aging had receded. He appeared as a man of his true age, 58 years of strength and dignity, rather than the withered shell the curse had created. His amber eyes shone with vitality and something more, a wild power that had not existed before, the essence of the shadow wolf now integrated into his being. Alara felt the changes in herself as well. Her brown hair now carried permanent silver streaks, and fine lines marked her face where none had existed before. The ritual had extracted its price. She had aged, giving some of her life force to restore Magnus, and through him, the land. Yet she felt not weaker, but stronger, the wild power they now shared flowing through her veins alongside her natural healing abilities. "The covenant is remade," Magnus murmured, his voice rough with emotion as he touched her face with wondering fingers. "And you with it." Before Alara could respond, the garden doors burst open. Gerard stood at the entrance, sword drawn, Lady Seraphina and a contingent of armed men behind him. Beyond them, Alara glimpsed Alaric and the royal guards, bloodied but defiant. "Stop this witchcraft," Gerard commanded, his voice carrying none of its usual smooth control. Fear and desperation had stripped away his calculated mask, revealing the raw ambition beneath. "The council has voted. The king is unfit, the crown forfeit." His words died in his throat as he fully registered the scene before him, the transformed royal tree pulsing with golden light, the king no longer a curse-ravaged shadow of himself, but restored to health and power. Most shocking to Gerard must have been the visible evidence of the mating bond between Magnus and Alara, the silver streaks in her hair mirroring his, the subtle glow of magic that connected them. "The council's vote is irrelevant," Magnus replied, his voice carrying new authority as he rose to his feet, helping Alara to stand beside him. "The curse is broken, transformed by covenant freely made. Blackwood lives again." As if to confirm his words, another tremor shook the garden. Not of destruction this time, but of renewal. Through the broken dome, they could see golden light spreading across the night sky, following the path of roots extending from the royal tree throughout the kingdom. Where this light touched, blight receded and life reawakened, 20 years of decay reversed in moments of miraculous restoration. Gerard stood transfixed, watching his carefully constructed plans crumble before the evidence of power far beyond his manipulation. Lady Seraphina, however, retained her calculating presence of mind. "Witchcraft remains witchcraft," she declared, stepping forward with hands raised in what Alara recognized as a magical gesture. "Whatever you've done can be undone. The death blossoms were merely a beginning, I have studied Morwen's arts these 20 years, waiting for this moment." Before anyone could react, Seraphina hurled a sphere of sickly green energy directly at Magnus and Alara. The magical attack, raw hatred given form, similar to Morwen's original curse, but cruder and less potent, sped toward them with deadly intent. Alara moved instinctively, stepping in front of Magnus with hands raised. What happened next astonished even her. The corrupting magic struck an invisible barrier between them, not simply stopping, but transforming upon contact. Green energy turned gold, hatred converted to pure life force that flowed into the royal tree, strengthening rather than harming. "Impossible," Seraphina whispered, her confidence crumbling as her attack not only failed, but strengthened her opponents. "The new covenant protects its own," Magnus explained, his hand resting on Alara's shoulder. "What was once vulnerability to corruption is now immunity. Morwen's arts have no power here." Seeing their advantage lost, Gerard's men began to back away uncertainly. Only Gerard himself remained, his handsome face contorted with fury and disbelief. 20 years, he spat. 20 years I've waited, positioned myself, cultivated allies. The throne should have been mine when you fell to the curse. It was promised to me." "Promised by whom?" Magnus asked, though the answer was already evident in Gerard's wild eyes. "By Morwen herself." Gerard's control shattered completely, years of careful deception abandoned in his rage. "She came to me before that final battle, offered me the crown if I ensured her escape. I failed her then, but I kept faith these 20 years, waiting for the curse to complete its work." The confession echoed through the garden, heard not only by those present, but carrying beyond the broken dome to the castle courtyard where council members and common folk alike had gathered. The revelation of Gerard's long treachery, his willful participation in Blackwood's suffering, turned even his staunchest supporters pale with horror. "For betrayal of crown and kingdom," Magnus pronounced, his voice heavy with judgment, but devoid of personal vengeance. "For conspiracy with dark powers against the people of Blackwood, for 20 years of treason masked as loyalty, I strip you of lands, titles, and position. Your fate will be decided by council justice rather than royal decree, a first gesture of the new covenant between ruler and ruled." Guards moved forward to seize Gerard, who offered no resistance, his life's ambition visibly crumbling before his eyes. Seraphina attempted to flee, but found herself paralyzed by a gesture from Alara. Her healing power reversed to temporarily bind rather than release. "The witch's apprentice will face separate judgment," Magnus continued. "Her knowledge of dark arts makes her both dangerous and potentially valuable. Confinement rather than execution may serve Blackwood better in the long term." As the prisoners were led away, the garden filled with people, council members, servants, guards, and commoners, all drawn by the miraculous transformation spreading throughout the kingdom. Among them came Diana and Cormac, the children pushing through the crowd to reach Alara. "Mother!" Diana cried, flinging herself into Alara's arms with relieved abandon. Then she pulled back, her young face a study in confusion and wonder, as she truly looked at her mother. Her small fingers reached up to touch the silver streaks in Alara's hair, her eyes widening at the subtle changes in her mother's appearance. "You're different," Diana whispered. "The White Wolf said there would be a price, but—" Her gaze shifted to Magnus, then back to Alara, her preternaturally perceptive eyes seeing the invisible bond that now connected them. "You're his now, and he's yours." Alara knelt to meet her daughter at eye level, taking the child's hands in hers. "I am still yours first, Diana," she assured her. "That will never change. But yes, King Magnus and I are joined now, bonded to each other and to Blackwood itself." Diana's expression remained solemn as she processed this new reality. "Will he be my father now?" she asked, her voice small but steady. Magnus knelt beside Alara, respecting the child's need for clarity without intruding on the intimate moment between mother and daughter. "Only if you wish it," he told Diana gently. "Bonds of choice can be as sacred as those of blood." "Your brave heart and clear sight helped save this kingdom. You have already earned your place in Blackwood's future, whatever title you choose to accept or reject." The girl studied him with the same penetrating gaze that had seen the corruption in the royal tree, the darkness in Gerard, the true nature of the white wolf. Whatever she sought in Magnus's amber eyes, she seemed to find it. "The shadows inside you don't fight anymore," she observed. "They're part of you now, like they were always supposed to be." "Indeed they are," Magnus agreed with a smile. "Thanks in no small part to your mother's healing and your own bravery." Diana's solemn expression finally broke into a tentative smile. "I always wanted a father who could fight the monsters," she confided. "Mother is good at healing, but sometimes you need someone who knows the darkness." The wisdom in her childish assessment stunned both adults. Cormac, who had approached more hesitantly, gave his friend an admiring glance. "My father says the king has the heart of a wolf now," the boy added. "That's why the blight is retreating, because he carries the guardian spirit." "Wisdom from the mouths of children," Magnus murmured to Alara, visibly moved by the acceptance offered by Diana and the simple faith of Alaric's son. He rose, addressing the gathered crowd with renewed authority. "People of Blackwood, witness the rebirth of our kingdom. The curse that has blighted our land for 20 years is broken, transformed into a new covenant that binds monarch not as master, but as guardian, not as ruler, but as servant to the realm." A cheer rose from the assembled crowd, hope replacing the fear and suspicion that had pervaded the kingdom for so long. Through their bond, Alara felt Magnus's genuine emotion, not triumph or pride, but profound relief tinged with newly awakened joy. "There is much to rebuild," he continued once the cheers subsided. 20 years of blight cannot be undone in a single night, despite the miracle you've witnessed. The land will heal swiftly now, but trust between crown and people must be re-earned through actions, not merely words." His hand sought Alara's, their fingers intertwining naturally. "In this, I will not work alone. Lady Alara of Willowbrook has consented to join her life to mine, her healing gifts to my protective strength. Together, we forge a new beginning for Blackwood, one built on balance rather than dominion, on mutual flourishing rather than mere power." Another cheer erupted, this one led by Alaric and echoed even by several council members who had previously supported Gerard. The visible evidence of the kingdom's renewal, golden light still spreading across the night sky, withered plants visibly regenerating throughout the garden, made converts of even the most skeptical. As the celebration continued into the night, Diana remained close to Alara and Magnus, observing the proceedings with her characteristic quiet intensity. Late in the evening, when the formal ceremonies had concluded and most of the court had retired, she approached them in the relative privacy of a garden alcove. "Will we live in the castle now?" she asked, practical concerns replacing her earlier philosophical questions. "Yes, dear heart," Alara answered, drawing her daughter close. "Though we'll visit Willowbrook when you wish it. Your garden there needn't be abandoned." "And Cormac? Can he still be my friend even though you're the queen now?" Magnus chuckled warmly. "Of course, and more than that, as Alaric's son, Cormac will train as a royal guard if he wishes it. His loyalty to you during your quest to the sacred grove has already marked him as worthy of such honor." Diana's face brightened at this news, clearly relieved that her newfound royal status wouldn't cost her the first real friendship she had formed. "Good. He promised to teach me sword fighting, though his father doesn't know yet." Alara and Magnus exchanged amused glances over the child's head. In the chaos of transformation, these small, human concerns, a child's friendships, a promise of sword lessons, grounded them in the reality of the life they would now build together. "To bed with you now," Alara said gently. "Tomorrow brings a new world to explore, and you'll need your rest." As Diana reluctantly departed under the watchful eye of a trusted handmaiden, Magnus drew Alara into his arms, the bond between them humming with shared emotion too complex for words. "Your daughter accepts what many adults would struggle to comprehend," he observed. "The necessity of both light and shadow, healing and protection, in true balance." "Children often see truth more clearly than we do," Alara replied, uncluttered by prejudice or ambition. "A wisdom we would do well to remember as we rebuild," Magnus agreed, his gaze turning toward the castle where lights still burned in many windows as the kingdom adjusted to its sudden transformation. The road ahead will not be without challenges. 1 year later, Magnus stood on the castle's highest tower, watching golden sunlight wash across a transformed landscape. Where blight had reigned for 2 decades, abundance now flourished. Fields heavy with harvest, forests vibrant with life, villages bustling with renewed prosperity. The anniversary of the Covenant remaking had been declared a kingdom-wide celebration, with festivities continuing for 3 days throughout Blackwood. Yet the king had sought a moment's solitude at dawn, a private acknowledgement of all that had changed in a single remarkable year. "I thought I might find you here," came Alara's voice from the stairway entrance. She crossed to stand beside him at the parapet, her silver-streaked hair catching the morning light. "Diana had another dream vision. She insisted I tell you immediately." Magnus turned to his mate with a smile that still carried traces of wonder, even after a year of shared life. The bond between them had deepened with time, growing from magical necessity into something far more profound and personal. "What did our young seer perceive this time?" he asked, his arm naturally encircling Alara's waist. "Life," she answered simply, guiding his hand to rest upon her abdomen where the slightest curve had begun to form. New life, despite all odds. Understanding dawned in Magnus's eyes. At 59 and 40, neither had expected children from their union. The price paid to heal the kingdom had seemed to include that possibility. Diana would inherit the throne as their formally adopted daughter, a future already accepted by crown and council alike. "Impossible," he whispered, joy warring with disbelief. "And yet," Alara replied, her smile echoing his own amazement, "quite evidently true. The white wolf appeared in Diana's dream, standing guard over a cradle. Some gifts, it seems, are returned when freely surrendered." Magnus gathered her close, their bond humming with shared emotion too complex for words. The covenant continued to unfold in ways neither could have predicted, ancient magic responding to the genuine balance they had created between them. Far below in the castle courtyard, morning light illuminated the royal tree, no longer confined to the glass garden, but transplanted to the heart of public life, its branches offering shade to all who sought it. At its base, a simple stone marker had been placed, bearing words that summarized the new foundation of Blackwood's governance. Not dominion, but guardianship. Not power over, but power with. Not command, but covenant. Shadow and light in perfect balance. In the eastern wing of the castle, Diana sat with Cormac in the royal library, ostensibly studying history, but actually discussing the latest gossip from court. At 13, she had grown into her role as crown princess with remarkable adaptability, though she remained refreshingly direct in her assessments of court politics. "Father says Lord Gerard's final judgment will be announced today," she told Cormac, using the title for Magnus that had become natural over the past year. Cormac nodded, his expression somber. "My father says the council was divided between execution and permanent exile." The fate of Gerard and Serafina had been a matter of extensive deliberation throughout the year. Initially imprisoned in separate towers of the castle, they had faced numerous hearings and examinations as the extent of their crimes became clear. Serafina had eventually revealed much about Morwen's dark arts, knowledge that proved valuable in understanding and countering lingering traces of corruption throughout the kingdom. In exchange for this cooperation, she had been sentenced to lifetime confinement in a remote monastery where her abilities could be channeled toward scholarship rather than destruction. Gerard's case had proven more complex. His 20 years of calculated treachery had caused immeasurable suffering, yet the new covenant demanded justice tempered with mercy. The final decision, permanent exile beyond the mountains, stripped of title and status, forbidden ever to return under pain of death, would be announced at midday. "Diana says Magnus isn't seeking vengeance," Cormac observed, using the familiar name for the king that his position as Alaric's son permitted, "even though Gerard nearly destroyed everything." Mother says true healing requires acknowledging pain without being consumed by it, Diana replied with the wisdom she had absorbed from both her parents. Besides, Gerard must live with the knowledge that he failed. That's a punishment worse than death for someone like him. Outside, bells began to toll, signaling the beginning of the day's formal ceremonies. Diana closed her book with a sigh. We should go. Mother will be looking for me, and you need to join your father's guard. As they headed toward the courtyard, Diana paused by a window overlooking the castle grounds. In the distance, barely visible at the edge of the royal forest, a large white wolf stood watching the castle, its form seemingly translucent in the morning light. The guardian still watches, she murmured to herself. The wolf had appeared periodically throughout the year, visible only to those with the gift of second sight, herself, occasionally Alara, and rarely Magnus when the bond's power flowed strongest. Cormac followed her gaze, but saw nothing. Another vision? He asked, accustomed to his friend's unique perceptions. Diana nodded. A reminder that the covenant needs constant tending, like any living thing. With wisdom beyond her years, she added, balance isn't something you achieve once and forget. It's something you maintain through daily choice. The Shadow King and his healing queen watched the kingdom awaken to a new day, their personal joy merging with the greater purpose they served. Redemption, not as an ending, but as continuous rebirth. Shadow not defeated but transformed. Life persisting despite all odds in the perfect balance of opposites joined as one.